Let's roll. This is Countercharge, your podcast for ranks, flanks, and kings of war. Join your hosts as they delve into the world of Panithor and bring you worldwide coverage of all things Kings of War.
Welcome to Countercharge. I'm Mark Barber.
I'm Mike Rossi.
And I'm Alex Darst.
And I'm Nathan Arnold. And today we get to have Mark back on the cast for our review and kind of walkthrough of the book Pious, which I know has a whole lot of meaning to him, and especially to kind of his history with writing the novels for originally Kings of War and then branching into the Armada side of things in Panithor. So really excited to get into this book and talk through really how everyone feels and where we're at with this book before at some point in the future we'll probably do Through Thick and Thin, which is the second in the series. So a lot going on with the book, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of insights from everyone here. We are going to start with a quick fantasy reading origin stories from Alex. Since he's never been on the podcast, he's never been on Countercharge, so at some point we'll have to get the gaming full history, but probably at least touch on some of that. So Alex, what's your fantasy reading origin stories? How does that touch on your gaming history? And then, of course, how does that touch on this being an important book for you?
You got me with a bit of a curveball for the gaming, or not the gaming, but the fantasy reading origin story. But for me, it probably started with Redwall series books back in like elementary school and so forth. You know, that's a series with like mice and badgers and rats and whatnot fighting amongst each other. I became more of a sci-fi kid, I think, after that. A lot of Star Wars stuff, Star Wars Expanded Universe stuff, like Timothy Zahn, for instance, as the author writing the Grand Admiral Thrawn-based books. But in the 2010s is when I started getting into more tabletop related fantasy with Mech Warrior games. I was playing a bunch then and tried reading some old Battletech fiction. That kind of led me down the longer story, which I'll skip for now, of getting into Battletech, then getting into Mantic games, starting with Armada first. I don't think you hear a lot of Mantic players starting with Armada versus starting with Kings of War, maybe the sci-fi Mantic stuff. But as far as the Mantic games books, I've read quite a few. Broken Alliance, Sen of the Goblin King, Pride of a King, Rise of Celestians, Edge of the Abyss, Nature's Knights, quite a few of them. Reading through Thick and Thin right now. And, of course, Pious, which is, to date, my favorite Mantic book. Bravo to you, by the way, Mark. Love the book. But, yeah, it sings to me a lot. I am, in fact, an American naval officer in the United States Navy, but I'm a reservist now. I did 8 years active duty, 6 years on reserve duty now. For those that maybe don't know the American Navy reserve system, it's basically like I have a normal job, but I have like a half a job or a quarter of a job in the Navy Reserve still. But been quite a while since I've been on a gray hold floaty thing, otherwise called a ship, since then. But that's basically my my origin story and why this book sings to me so much. Just so much of what I read in the book I found really relatable, especially all the stuff happening outside the battles, But it was fantastic, and I'll turn it over the mic.
So not a lot of history fighting orcs and swinging cutlasses.
Yeah, I've never had a splinter inside of my abdomen or anything of that effect. No, I've been quite fortunate in that regard.
All right, awesome. Well, I appreciate it, especially knowing your naval history. When we were talking about bringing this in, I said Alex is one of the people that I've got to get in here on this. And then, of course, we've got Mike back, who I think is the only other author that has touched on ships/boats in their books. So it's great to have Mike back in to throw his obviously extensive knowledge of naval activity in as well.
You're killing me. I'm the guy that keeps calling it a boat, right?
And then Mark, I know we've had a lot of conversations. This is probably a book that means a lot to you with your history and your experience, what you've been through. And I want to make sure in going through this, is there anything as far as you writing the book, you coming into this from a perspective on writing something that had not been touched on in the Tales of Panithor and the kind of the overall scope of what had been done in the novels. Was this something you pushed for, or was this something that was sort of, hey, Mark, would you like to do this? How did you end up in this position writing this book?
it was really different to all the other ones. I'd say of the three franchises I've written fiction for, is it three or four? Four, I guess, if you count Armada separately. I think this is the only one, other than one I'm going to be signing contracts on in the next couple of weeks. This is the only one I haven't gone, hey, I've got an idea, and gone forwards with. It was very much, as it was relayed to me, we blame Brandon for everything. So this was Brandon Rossbond's fault, as most things are. So Mantic were working on Armada, and they got in touch with Brandon kind of behind the scenes under the non-disclosure agreement and said, this is going on, and we'd like a novel to coincide with it. So they said, look, I know this is a big ask, but do you have an author you can magic up out of nowhere who's going to work fast, understands the Kings of War lore, understands, can get into game mechanics of a game that hasn't been finished yet, and has sort of ideally some experience at sea, which is a bit of a unicorn, it doesn't exist. And Brandon kind of spat out his cornflakes. It's like, I have a guy. So, because I've spent a little bit of time at sea, and and I've done, I think at that point, I'd certainly done Steps to Deliverance. I can't remember if I'd done, I think one of the follow-ups was done, but was in limbo, waiting for editing. So they were kind of two down. But the thing was the timelines. So it kind of came back and said, the game is still being developed. It's largely there, but stuff's going to change. So can you write a novel for it to coincide with it? We'll keep you updated on the game as it develops. But also, can you deliver it in half the normal timeline? Because we normally get a standard contract saying, here's what you're doing. And it's like, you've got 50% of the time to do it. And it was COVID, and both my wife and I were in safety critical roles, which meant we weren't at home. We were both tag teaming. So one of us would do a 12-hour shift, the other do a 12-hour night shift, while the other one had childcare. So it was quite a big ask. It was like, and they're like, yeah, but he knows loads about ships and stuff. And it's like, yeah, but not age of sail frigates. I don't know about that. So the first 2 or 3 weeks of it was spent on research. I didn't even put pen to paper. It was like, learn the game, get all the stuff sent over. We've got no models, so just cut out bits of cardboard and try and learn the game and imagine it, whilst learning about the kind of Napoleonic and just pre-Napoleonic age of sail stuff. So all of that banter, wit, repartee, whatever you want to call it, that goes on between the ship's company, that was fine. I kind of experienced a lot of that stuff firsthand. But talking about, mizzen tops and all this sort of stuff, that's just stuff that kind of gets mentioned in Hornblower and Aubrey and all that sort of stuff, but I don't understand it. But fortunately, I had a couple of friends, one in particular, who had sailed competitively for Great Britain. And was working with me on this safety critical role. So I was just kind of cornering him every day going, we've got a job to do. Can we forget that and talk about how, what's the difference between a square rig ship and lateen rigging for if you're in irons and all these sorts of questions, that I didn't really put in the book that much anyway. So that was the origins of it. Bit of a long answer, but that's kind of how it came about.
It's really good insight as to how we ended up here. And I'll say, I keep saying this, I feel like every book, it's almost like I want to just keep reiterating that the books are really good. But Pious feels very different than a lot of the other books, not just because there are ships involved, but it is a different kind of story. It is that high seas fantasy still, but high seas swashbuckling pirates. Like, it's got all the things in it that me as a person that grew up loving that stuff wanted to be in the book. And so I know we're going to get into it. We'll get in the spoiler section here in a little while, and obviously we'll get through some of that. But I want to talk, and we'll start with Mike on this. Is this a book that you were wanting to read? I don't know, Mike, if you've got a lot of history with Armada like Alex does. So is this a book that you were like, I really want to read this because I like Armada, I like ships? Kind of where are you coming from with reading the book?
Like Mark had alluded to, I've read a lot of Aubrey, a lot of Hornblower stuff, and I really love that Napoleonic naval tradition, right? And so when Armada came out, I like a broad range of historical games, and so I played a lot of naval games. And the fact that Armada was a fantastic game, like it's just well put together. It's fun to play, right? And then when the book came out, I am in a pretty tight reading circle. A lot of my friends read a lot of stuff, so do I, and we pass books back and forth. And one of my friends was like, "Listen, you gotta read Pious. It is great." And this was before, I had read a lot of the game fiction around, because I was writing as fast as I could when I was writing Honor's Price, right? So I didn't have time to read. And so Pious was handed to me as a high recommendation, and when I read it, I was like, yeah, this is a fantastic adventure story. It made me feel the world, made me feel the game at the same time. So as Mark said, like he's learning the game mechanics, and also he has to incorporate the world lore on top of trying to make it technically correct from an Age of Sail perspective, and he nailed it all across the board. It was really well done.
And Alex, I know obviously with your naval history, this is something that touches a little bit closer to home for you, but kind of walk me through your thoughts and processes to pick it up Pious, because you said it's still your favorite book. Armada is still one of your most favorite things to do. So what are your thoughts on it and kind of the general feel for the book overall?
Yeah, I mean, I think you might have only maybe answered your own question there too, Nathan. With Armada being my entry point to the Mantic game universe, and I got, a lot of the fleets. At the time when I started, hey, guess what? There was one book in town when it came to reading the fantasy lore for it, and that was Pious. So, hey, I guess that's where I'm going to start, right? But I'd read some game-based fiction before, and it's good, but Pious really sung out to me as like a cut above the rest, kind of as you're saying too, Nathan. But yeah, that pretty direct path to it when it was the only one in town, and now I'm about a little over halfway through thick and thin now, and praying to God there's going to be more in the pipe eventually too.
I think it's interesting for me when I picked up Armada. I want to say I bought into the Kickstarter. It was Kickstarted, right? If it wasn't, I bought it right when it came out, whatever it was. And I was like, okay, this is going to be a fun little side thing, and it's going to be a game that we just occasionally play. And then it ended up being like a primary game for about a year for the group that I was in. And even now, if someone said we're going to play a game this afternoon, just hang out, have a couple of drinks, eat some snacks, and just chill, what do you want to play? Like Kings of War is not the first one that comes to mind. I love Kings of War, but Kings of War is my thinky game. It's the game that I'm like, I'm going to sit down and just mentally go against somebody, and we're going to have a great time, but it's really intense and it's really complicated and there's a lot going on. And while Armada is more complicated from a technical perspective than Kings of War, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. It doesn't play that way. It plays really easy, and you can just hang out with some friends, have some food, have some drinks, and just chill for a few hours and get multiple games in, and it's an absolute ball. And so I was taken aback by how good Armada was when it came out. And then obviously they've now expanded into, well, all the ships are in the vault. It's a lot easier for everyone to access. It is one of those entry points into Mantic as a gaming company, because all the 3D prints are really good. They're all in a really solid place. The rules are really good. At some point, they'll come out with a second edition. But it's one of the few games where I feel like you don't need to really fast. This is not a game you need to pop another edition out because there's a whole bunch of stuff you got to fix. It's in a really, really good place, and it's still an absolute heck of a time. And it is a lot of fun to have. I had not read Pious until I was getting prepared for this cast. One of the reasons was I was like, okay, I've got to read it before the cast, and reading it again may give me some different insight than reading it for the first time. And then I read it and I said, wow, okay, this is high on my list of books that I would tell someone to read just to understand more about the world. And it's not as deep into the world as some of the other books are, but it is one of those pieces where you feel like it's an easier introduction to the world because it doesn't feel so very foreign from our world. Ships are ships, cannons are cannons, swords are swords. And yeah, there's orcs on the other side, but it still has a lot of the same flow. And there's not some dude throwing magic around and a dragon flying overhead in this one. It's dudes on ships shooting each other, cutting each other down, and so forth. So it is absolutely a great introduction into the world. It's a great introduction into Mantic, and I think it is probably on the high on the list of books I would say start reading these if you want to get into the kind of the overall Mantic books, in Panathor especially.
A lot of times on my leisure time, I don't want to go through all the thinking of a 2,300 point Kings of War game, which is, kind of the standard here in the U.S. I just want to do something that's more relaxing, if you will, easier to pick up. And I feel like, the book, Pious as well, kind of is like that too. Never once did I pick it up and thought like, all right, let's get through this. This is a chore. It was always like a very inviting read, just kind of like the way Armada was in that. And not, the character is very well defined and all that. So there's not a lot of super hard thinking or confusion. I can just like pick it up and just enjoy it. And man, I love that about the book.
When I started reading it, I was flying to a work thing, and I ended up devouring the book in around 3 days in between work meetings and stuff. And just, the minute every time I had half an hour, I would just crack that open and keep flying through it. It was very, it was like candy, right? It really, and I mean that in the best way, so it didn't feel like work at all.
And I'll give Mark, I want to give you a little bit of props on this one, because I think when I read Steps to Deliverance the first time, I was expecting a lot less, not as expecting less interesting read. I was expecting this to be like, okay, Mantic's kind of trying to figure out where to go, and it'll be this kind of weird start into things, but it was a lot deeper, a lot more involved. It really drags you into the world, kicking and screaming, and says, no, you're gonna learn so much about Panathor in this book. And then Armada is just like this really smooth, simple, just, you're gonna have a heck of a time. This is gonna be just absolute fun to just read this book and have a great time. And so it's a very different feel than we had with Steps to Deliverance. And obviously we'll get into the next, the other books down the road. But it is, and this may have been part of what you mentioned, Mark, earlier, with how vastly different the timeline you had was. But is that sort of your intent walking in, or is this something that was just sort of happenstance that you made it this really easy to read, easy to get into piece of material?
Thank you for all of the kind words. I'm misting up here. Because it's genuinely really kind. Because Pious, it's a bit of an odd one in terms of define whether it is a successful book or not, which we can sort of come on to in a bit. Which is it didn't shift as many copies as Steps to Deliverance, but those who read it, the feedback was consistently stronger. So it's like Spinal Tap. We've just got a select audience here, It's like we're not losing popularity. It's just we're just selective. Pious was a smaller audience, but people enjoyed it more. So it's always great to hear when you kind of you got it right, so to speak. I think the thing with this one was the tone. From to use, I suppose, the if that's the correct word or not. It's upbeat. At least that was the intention. And that was in terms of generally the character interactions, the stakes, but also the setting. Setting is this big thing, isn't it? You kind of look at horror movies. Horror movies don't tend to be in the tropics in the sun. You want to set the tone. And when I knew I wanted to write about the Basileans because I'd already done that, and that was kind of where I was getting more comfortable. So then when I saw the starter set was Basileans and Orcs, it's like, okay, it's these two. And then you look at the map, and I kind of prodded and went, I think it'll work here. Then you start to build up from that point onwards and go, okay, well, we need to where would the major naval bases be? What's the equivalent of, if you're looking at the Napoleonic or 100 years before, if you're looking for the golden age of piracy, where's the equivalent of Portsmouth and Plymouth and London for the main dockyards? Then you start to think about, well, what's the equivalent of places in the Caribbean for the trade lanes, whatever it might be, and build it up. And then it's like, I think this point here would be an interesting place to set it. Then you look at it from the Orc point of view, and you're like, okay, well, these guys aren't a navy. They could be, but I think it would make more sense to introduce them as kind of a fractured band of people, so pirates. And that was when I think if I did it now, I might do it slightly differently. In that, putting that together, I was a bit too historically accurate. In that, if you look at, and again, it's the same in Through Thick and Thin. When you look at the pirates, They are what pirates really were in the Caribbean, not what the cool movies are. So without getting too nerdy into the size of ships, you watch like the Johnny Depp movies and the pirates are cutting around with first rates with 100 guns and 3 gun decks. No pirate would ever be able to run one of those things logistically. It's just impossible. There are a few standout examples in history, particularly in the Far East. If you look into Chinese history, there are some examples of enormous pirate fleets. And some of the ones which get quoted of, 400 ships. But it's like, these 400 ships had like 2 guns each. They were only a little bit bigger than rafts. In terms of large ships, again, Blackbeard, you had a 40-gun ship. That's if you're including swivel guns, and a Navy wouldn't. Blackbeard's enormous flagship was not enormous. That's why Blackbeard never once closed with the Navy for a fight. He was always running because he knew he'd get taken out. So that was why I kind of, okay, so we're now going to, I wanted to do that sort of thing with the pirates in that area, saying the Basileans would have this kind of naval dominance in here, but the further afield you go, that's a problem. But where they are is on the cusp of, they have control just, but when you start to go south, it's getting worse, and you're into kind of forbidden territory where the pirates can't be policed as effectively. And then it just kind of flowed that if you look at the geography of it, that'd be sun, palm trees, sand, all this sort of stuff. And that's where the tone came from, was this kind of small number of policing officials trying to cut down on not cool one-piece pirates, but nasty, realistic pirates, where there's loads of them. But if you catch up with them, you're going to beat them. But then this idea of actually it's orcs, and orcs like big shooty stuff. So let's have an orc who's on the way up and getting big shooty stuff, but do it all in the sun. And Vince, the boss of Wintersaar, insisted you have to have a pirate bar fight, and you have to. What was it? There's a phrase in there that I have to look up. It was something on the lines of avast you salty cur, or something like that. Something real kind of Monkey Island levels of pirate. He said you've got to put that phrase in as well. So all of this was kind of guiding it. That there was some real nerdy history, Rivet County. That's not the kind of the right kind of Sherman and bolt action levels of nerding going on, but also some silliness as well. And I guess that was it. I guess that's what drove the tone.
Spot on there, Mark, when you say there's the two halves of the tone, because yes, you've got this nitty gritty, and it leans heavily on the Navy side, the Basilean Navy side, where everything's exact. And I know we'll get into the spoilers section, but there's literally conversations between two of the characters where it's explaining how Navy stuff works. And that helps for those of us that have no knowledge of what's going on there, and to get brought into that book a little bit. But it also introduces that side of the conflict as the side that really knows what they're doing. And then you go over to the orc side, and they're like, ship go, and make the goblins make sure it go better than I could make it go, but I'm gonna hit stuff. And that's this split between the two sides. And then you have the sort of stuff in the middle. You have the non-naval conversation, which we'll get into, so they're not the Basilean Navy people, but then you also have the non-orc pirates. So these different factions, sort of, that you get the view from each of them as to how life is different, and the reality on one side meets the fantasy on the other side in this great way, where you don't have to just care about the nerdy naval stuff, or just care about it being a fun swashbuckling adventure. This book is, we're going to kind of do all of that, and everyone's just going to sort of be like, yeah, no, that totally fits, because it's an orc pirate. He's going to do what you expect a pirate to do from a movie back in the 50s and 60s, and the bad guy being the bad guy. So I think it's a great way to bring all those pieces in with what you had in front of you. It ended up really great.
I like how you brought up the dichotomy between the Basileans and the orcs. I can't remember which chapter it was in. I think it was in the same chapter, very close to each other in the book. There was a description. I think this is non-spoiler because it isn't really a plot point. This is more of a theme point. how the Basileans moor their ships versus how the orcs moor their ships. And, the Basileans, like in modern day, they do like a very nice, gentle, like touchdown on the pier or on the quay. One that in modern day wouldn't, like rub your bumper all over your paint on the side of your ship, right? While orcs is like, we're just going to crash in the dock and they can fix the dock later, or whatever it was. It was really great showing that contrast between the two.
Yeah, a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of displays of the difference between those. And in part, that's the characters. The characters are, they're very three-dimensional, and it's only one book with a lot of characters. There's a lot of different people that I think everyone sort of will hang on to something different about different people. But even just looking at the orc characters versus the human characters, and then there's obviously some salamanders. We get some side piece into kind of where they're at, but you get a very different feel on how they think and how they act because you are getting the thoughts and opinions and side of the conflict from the orcs directly. This isn't we only see the good guy side of it. You absolutely do get both sides. And I'll say in a very different way than Steps to Deliverance, where everybody was kind of human. And so everyone sort of has the same experience and the same feel, and you can kind of connect to everyone. It's honestly really hard to connect to an orc, but then the orc is telling you what they're thinking. And their thinking is, I don't know how to do this better. I mean, the goblins kind of do, but we have to figure it out. We can't just be what we are. We have to evolve or we're going to have problems. And so that journey that the orcs go on, that Guruk goes on, is a little bit unexpected, but you start to see, okay, there's some growth, there's some progress. And I think that touches back a little bit to what you were saying, Mark, with just how do you deal with what orcs would have? They'd have a giant ship because giant ship's better than anything. So of course you want the giant ship, regardless of the logistics, because you don't need to worry about logistics. If goblins and orcs die, oh well, there's more, we can keep going. So very different feel than the minute, a very specific, all the accounting is sorted out and everything's ready to go with how the Basileans handled things. Mike, any thoughts on kind of, again, general book, getting into the characters a little bit, anything before we jump into theming here in a moment?
Yeah, there's a couple things. I just want to jump back to a point that Mark had made earlier about if you have, traditionally pirates, historical pirates would be like, okay, there's too many guns here, we're getting out of here, right? And so because traditionally they play the cagey game, the long game, but he has to incorporate orcs into the book as a faction, and orcs are not going to be sneaky. They're not going to run away. There's multiple times in the book that I really love, like where Guruk is like, okay, we're going to go and we're going to go to this other location. We're going to leave this fight. And the second in command is like, we still have guns. Like, why are we leaving? Right. They don't understand the tactics of it the way that he does. Right. Because they're just like, go, 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 more, big, big, big. And so, yeah, it's really cool because there are multiple times in the book, and we've mentioned this a couple times, about how like the human pirates are like, why did you go fight that? Why'd you go fight that Basilean that you're going to bring the heat down on us? And Guruk is like, because we fight. What are we even talking about? Like, what are you doing? Why aren't you fighting? So it's that attitude between the two of them that, it really highlights the difference. And then on the other side, bringing in the Marine force, the Marine character who has no idea the way the Navy works. And it's like, why would you ask that guy to ask that guy to ask that guy to ask that guy to turn the ship? Why don't you just tell the guy to turn the ship, right? And to give us a window character, that window character for us as the reader to go, okay, so why does the Navy work like this, right? So really good work having juxtaposition or complementary characters to highlight the difference of just culture and thought between the different spheres of influence within the book. It really well done as far as that goes. So once again, like not knowing as much about the Navy, even after doing all the reading that I've done, it was nice having that in there, and it was really well done.
Yeah, it felt like nice of you to say again. Thank you. It felt like a bit of a cop out. I've got to admit that let's have a Marine officer who has no, so will ask all of the inverted commas stupid questions. It is not. That was not an original technique by me by any way, shape, or form. It's been done a million times, and it's been done better. And I was like, but also I was kind of cognizant of some of these books like Hornblower and Ramage and all this stuff, it can be really off-putting to people. And again, I don't think Pious didn't sell as much as Steps to Deliverance because it's worse, or however you want to quantify that. It's because it's got ships in it, and that puts people off. If you were to look at the fanatics groups on Facebook, if that's a kind of way to judge community sizes, I know it's kind of crude and it's not fair, but if you were to take that, the Armada community is nowhere near as big as the Kings of War community. And I think, again, a lot of that is, even though Armada is a fantastic game, and Black Seas, which it's owes so much to, is a really, really good game. And that was kind of my entry into Age of Sail stuff, was that game, was Black Seas. I knew nothing about Age of Sail stuff, not really, other than the Russell Crowe movie, which is really good. So yeah, there was, it puts people off. So it was like, how far do you go with the levels of detail? And I didn't want to go that far. And there's still some people who came back and got back in touch, and I do appreciate it, because it's it's not nitpicking, it's not complaining, it's constructive criticism to try and make you do better next time. Saying there was a little bit too much boaty terminology. There was a little bit too much. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But you're never going to get the balance right for every single reader. So by the same decree, some people may have read it and said there wasn't enough. It didn't have the ring of authenticity because there wasn't enough. So yeah, having that character there is just an attempt to try and bridge the gap, and also bring in some of the comedy that anyone who spent any time at sea will know about what it's like to go to sea for the first time, to be an expert in your field perhaps, and then go, it's like, why do you use those stupid words? Why am I getting shouted at for referring to that staircase as stairs, and saying, do I need to go up 2 floors to find? They're not floors, they're decks. And all of this stuff that people get really serious about. It seemed to be a way to kind of introduce that as a quite comedic way to explain it.
I want to highlight 2 other things that I for theme. The first is, I've read Steps to Deliverance. I read a bunch of the romantic fiction. This is the first time where I read the Basileans, and I felt like they were the honest to God good guys, right? Like they were really good guys, right? As opposed to it's just, so good that they're evil, or whatever all the other tropes that have been done with Basileans. Or they're broken because of a bunch of reasons, whatever. Like this was fun because it was. Because of that, I felt like I'm rooting for the good guys, and the good guys are good guys, right? And then the second thing, and I really enjoyed this too, when your characters, there were the right mix of stereotypes and non-stereotypes. So the stereotypes helped me, like the Captain Charn, I believe, is, when I read him, I was like, that's exactly how I expect him to act. Right, he is grumpy. He's breaking people in. He's making sure that he has cutting wit. Right, I was like, that dude is who I want him to be. James, a little more nuanced. Right, other characters had a little more less stereotype to them, and I really like that mix, because the stereotypes, I'm using that term actually as a positive, because it allows the reader, especially when they go into, let's say, a naval book, and there's a lot of other stuff that they're trying to navigate. Those are touch points for them where they can rely on the actions to allow them to explore what everyone else is doing. And then later on, the nuance with Charn comes out, which I really liked. It was very well done.
Yeah, I want to add, because and we'll jump into theming kind of the conversation around that side of the book. I think with the characters, this is honestly the first book that I've said I had to sit back at the end of it and go, okay, really, what are the themes? What are those underlying conversations, those pieces that we sort of understand inside a book that we then can talk about at a deeper level? And I said, it's not that they're not there. It's that it's more about the characters, how they're adapting, how they're changing in the world that they see, because more or less every single character in the book is going through a transition. They're going through a change of some kind in a major way, and the book is playing out these changes that every character is going through, and you just see the storyline of all of those changes interacting and how people are having to adapt to the world being different. And going back to someone like Charn, who's he is what you expect him to be. Absolutely, Mike. He is that guy that you're expecting, the grumpy ship captain who's really not going to be satisfied with anybody's work. And you get the, kind of peek behind the curtain and realize, okay, there is a lot more going on for this guy than he's portraying to everyone, and nobody else knows it but the reader. Like, this is the secret that the reader gets brought in on, that no one else gets to see in his world, because he doesn't let them in on that. And then you go over to Caitlin, who I think has the biggest shift in her character, but it's not this crazy thing. It's this, I have to adapt, I have to change, so I can either hate this or embrace it and move forward and really get into this role that I need to be playing, because I kind of have to. And so there's these, again, they're all happening at the same time. Every single transition, every single change, because the book moves from character to character in a really, but what I felt was fluid way. I'm not I want 5,000 characters in my books kind of a person. And then I get into this book and I'm like, but it fits. It flows, because the storyline, all the characters are being pushed up against this story that's going on, and you have to see how they all react. You have to see how they all change and adapt and try to overcome their circumstances. I thought it played really well with how they each interact. What were your thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, I'll have to save it for the spoiler section, but I might fight you on that Kathleen. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing Kathy, her name, but I might fight you on the fact that, or your statement that she is the one that changed the most. I could make an argument that James Elias had pretty big changes, and Captain Charn did too. But yeah, for me, this book theme wise, the action, all the ship stuff was great, but to me, it was all about the relationships between the characters and how they grown, especially the Basilean and Kathleen, their characters too. But just the way you got inside their heads and saw their calculus, all the multiple perspectives. To me, I agree, it's definitely much more of a character story, and there's some great action too. But for me, it was just all about the really well written characters and their growth, their change and adaptation.
I think a lot of the books we end up talking about the sort of themes and pieces on how we relate the book back to our world and our life, and sort of the conversations that we have in reality now. And I think this is a book that's, I would say, probably a little bit harder simply to go that direction, simply because there's not as much connection to the larger world. So we see Basileia as this thing that exists, but it exists at a distance, enough of a distance that there is the bureaucracy coming in, there's definitely religion coming in, but it's not a dictator hammering you over the head every day saying, hey, we've got to do things in this way. This is, we've got to hold the Basilean standard up to this and be these people. It is out on an island, literally in the ocean, and everyone having to live through that. And you see the scope of what's going on get reduced down to that. So the world is a bigger thing. There's a lot more that's going on, but it doesn't have the same feel like I got in Steps to Deliverance and a lot of other books where you're saying, oh, hey, this is a section of the bigger world. This is set on its own, and you can just sort of fall into the world and just be like, yeah, this world exists right here. I don't have to know that much about Panathor. I don't have to get involved in too much else, because the characters are right there in front of me, and I can really just understand what's going on and how that plays into everything.
So, Mark, I have a question, actually, just to piggyback on something Nate just said. I expected when I first cracked open the book that there was going to be a more religious presence on the ship. There'd be a chaplain on the ship, and there'd be somebody who was keeping doctrine, etc. Was that a conscious choice on your part to not have that, overt religious perspective or point of view character on the ship, or within any of the ships in the Navy? Was that a thing that you had hashed out with Brandon and Vince, or is it something that you'd hashed out with Mantic, or was that a decision that you had made?
Yeah, it was a conscious decision, which might seem a bit odd, because again, if you go back to real navies at the Age of Sail, faith was kind of really important. Well, I suppose societally it was a lot more important. But I kind of felt like I've done Steps to Deliverance, and it's about warriors in a religious fighting order. So there's a lot about religion. It's kind of a serious book. Then after that, I wrote Faith Aligned. So Faith Aligned had already been done by this point. And that's, I guess, a story for another day. But I've kind of looked at the feedback from Steps to Deliverance, and I particularly looked at what all the other authors were doing. And I said to myself, I need to go darker here. I'm being too happy clappy, too hero bright, and things need to be edging darker, which is why Faith Aligned is a darker story, again, with a lot of religious themes. And off the back of that, I thought, this just isn't me. You should write what you enjoy, not obviously you don't want to upset people, you don't want to disappoint your audience, but you're kind of going to inadvertently do that if you try and write something you don't enjoy. And Faith Aligned, whilst I'm happy with it as a story, it's not really me. I was trying to write more what I thought people wanted and less what I enjoy. So then Pious came along, and I was like, yeah, I'm just throwing all of that out the window, and if we'll take a gamble if this goes wrong. So it's going to be upbeat, energetic, silly jokes, and if people say, oh, geez, that book wasn't serious enough, that's fine. I learned from it, and I figured that putting a priest on board and doing more of this dive into religion when I'd just done 2 novels about paladins and religious fighting orders. Yeah, from a law point of view, it really, really would make sense that they should all have a naval chaplain on board. Every major, a realistic size, a rated fighting ship really should. So yeah, I've kind of ruined my own law there, I guess. But yeah, it was a conscious decision to just try and move away from those serious themes a bit more and make it a bit more lighthearted.
I will say you had an explanation for why there weren't wizards of some kind on the ship, and I would feel that maybe at some point that does extend to the priests also, and saying that yeah, they want to throw those people into the armies, they want to put those people into the place where more or less where all the regular people could see them, and not quote unquote waste those funds on these ships that are out there in the ocean that don't see action that often, that don't have that role in people's everyday life. And so I felt the explanation there was like, okay, that makes sense. And I don't feel like we missed having a chaplain priest sort of person. Like, you very easily could have said, okay, rather than Marines, I'm going to put a new chaplain on board, and that's going to be the guy that's the landlubber that has to learn everything. And that would have worked. It would have been fine, but it wouldn't have established the naval tradition and interactions as strong, because you would have then had the religious traditions that get overlaid and get that interjected into there. So if you're ever planning on doing a larger ship at some point, go to a dictator class and say, great, we're going to have the religion play more here, and we're going to have a priest. Or if you bring in, sisters and their side of things, I would imagine they're going to be a lot more religious in how they operate their ship than just sailors, because seamen are not going to necessarily be like, yeah, we absolutely want to bring the priest on board. That may be a conflict that they really don't want to be doing that so much. Even though it's an Aloha class ship, that doesn't necessarily mean that they want religion to be playing that foremost part. So I definitely don't think it was missing. I don't think that the religious, and especially being darker, was something that needed to happen in this book. All right, so let's shift. Any other theme topics as far as we're at? Sorry, I'll mention mine was battling against the odds was like the biggest thing I had. And it sounds weird to say, but that was from both sides. I think you have the Basileans who have this imminent threat, this huge threat coming from the orcs that are now raiding their trading lanes and doing awful things from their perspective. But then you go over to the orcs, and they absolutely feel like they're outnumbered. They feel like they're outgunned. They feel like they're the ones that have the disadvantage every single time. And it may not be in this one fight, but they're up against Basileia. They're up against this juggernaut of a thing that could send, 5 dictator class ships in to just nuke everybody if they really wanted to. And so the attitude from both sides really leans into, we have to take action because we're on a really rough path if we don't. We have to do things because we have to overcome this great adversary that we're faced with. From the Basilean side, it is the adversary is that big orc ship that's out there in the water somewhere that's hunting things down, and how terrifying that could be because they know there's not enough support. They know they don't have a couple of dictator class ships coming in to help them. And then on the orc side, they're going up against the massive juggernaut of the Navy and an entire empire. So I thought it was a great way to display for both sides that it's not that there's someone doesn't have the upper hand, that there's not really someone that has this huge advantage and the other side of the good guys that are fighting against it. Obviously, we're supposed to say orcs are the bad guys because they enjoy murdering people and doing awful things. From a morality perspective, yes, but the Basileans aren't really an underdog. There's no real underdog. They're just two sides that have very different concerns and very different thoughts on what can happen and trying to react to those circumstances. So I don't know if y'all have any thoughts on that, or obviously we can get into more theming things along the way before we jump. Fairly soon, we're going to jump into the spoilers section. So we're getting ready for that.
I mean, I could answer that with a bit more boring history stuff. So hey, let's do it. Let's do more boring history. It's kind of taken 100 years of history, of naval history, and little bits of it, which is a bit of a silly thing to do because, you know, if we compare ourselves here in 2025 to the way our country's navies were in 1925, so yeah, it's about the same thing, isn't it? It's not. It's really not. And it's exactly the same with, I was taking elements of Napoleonic stuff, and I was taking elements of the golden age of piracy, and they're about 100 years apart. And it's hugely different. But where I am in the world, I'm not a million miles from Falmouth, which was one of the largest deep water harbours in Europe. And it was the home of the frigate fleets for the Royal Navy during the Napoleonic Wars. And frigate captains were the fighter aces of the day. Their exploits were in newspapers. People knew their names from how many ships that they'd taken. So it wasn't the big first, second, third-rate captains. They were just there languishing on half pay, waiting for a proper war, waiting to get activated. So I was kind of thinking the same thing of, right, who are these guys and what they're going to be? It's going to be about a frigate. And I'd already played Black Seas a fair bit, so when I saw the ship cards for the Basileans and saw that no one said that the Alohi class was a frigate. That was something I made up, and I didn't get corrected, so it carried on. It was just an Alohi class. But because the stats were taken directly from the fifth-rate frigate in Black Seas, it's like, well, then clearly that's supposed to be a medium frigate. So I'm going to call it that, and I'm going to make this forward-operating frigate base to protect the sea lanes, just as it was in Falmouth, just down the road from me. I'm going to make these guys the kind of dueling heroes, whilst the big gun fleet is waiting for proper war back in the city of the Golden Horn. So that bit was all very Napoleonic, and then you kind of cue from the orc point of view, like you said. So who's an underdog here? The story is supposed to be very much, well, up until Gurak kind of pimps his ride and gets his Bismarck-sized ship later on. The orcs are the underdog, but it's about no one's meeting one-on-one. So it's kind of very much about what's your role here? What's your task? So for the orcs, it's lay low. Stay in shallow waters there or thereabouts where bigger ships can't get you, and sack as many things as possible. And then with the Basileans, it's like, so you've got this big frigate fleet, so therefore it's easier for you, right? But it's like, well, no, because our job is to not sustain a single civilian casualty. That's success for us. So success becomes massively put out of balance, which is real life. You know that rarely is a 2,300-point army going to meet a 2,300-point army with the same objective in real life. It's going to be massively disparate forces, but with a different objective, where one may have it a lot easier. So yeah, you've got the Basileans who've got all the resources and all the guns and all the people, but their task is infinitely harder, because even though they've got all these resources, it's still not enough. And with any military in history, it's never enough. You've never got enough resources. So that was kind of that balance. What I was trying to do with that is, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. That makes sense. And that, again, that's why to me that feel is very much the two sides that are not evenly matched and have those different objectives, and so everyone feels like they're a bit of the underdog. So absolutely, I feel that. Any other thoughts on theming before we jump into the spoiler section for everybody? All right. Well, then what we'll do here and now is take a quick break, and then we'll be coming back on the other end, get into the spoilers, actually talk through the story. So if you have not read the book yet and you don't want the book spoiled, number one, go get the book, read the book. It's a great book. I think all of us will agree there. Absolutely worth picking up and reading. You will not be disappointed whatsoever at all, unless I guess you paid ships, and then sure, yeah, it may not be your cup of tea, but otherwise, yes, read the book. It's absolutely great. And then come back and listen to the spoiler side, where we're going to get into all the details and the nitty gritty and talk through everything. And we'll see you on the other side.
Hi, this is Rob, the Goblin King, and you're listening to Countercharge.
And welcome back to the review on Pious. We're going to be getting into the spoiler section of the book now. So again, if you haven't read the book and don't want things spoiled, stop, go get the book, read the book, and then come back and continue. I hate doing that every time, but I also want to make sure that people know to get the book and read the book and then continue on. So we're going to jump into the story and go through some details, kind of walk through how things work. And I want to start off with the really sort of that opening, I hate to say scene, but it's that opening, maybe it's an act, whatever it is, in the Pious sort of getting brought into conflict with the Green Hammer and getting introduced to the main characters on sort of both ships, really just the Pious primarily at that point. So is anyone have any thoughts as to how that laid out? I thought it was a pretty fast introduction into how that is supposed to work and supposed to look. You get a just quick jump into here's ships, here's how things are going. We're already out there. We're already doing things. What were y'all's thoughts? We'll start with Alex on this, on that first sort of bit with the Pious getting into conflict with the Green Hammer.
So yeah, I thought it was just a fantastic. You set off kind of into a very excellent action sequence in the beginning, but you also are still getting that insight into characters and what they're thinking along the way too. That really plays in well to some of the deeper development later on. But yeah, a very, very, very great and realistic. I think, if I remember correctly, James had gotten off the mid-watch and was woken up as they beat the quarters, and kind of his thoughts on sleep is very precious whenever you're operating a ship, I know. And I thought that was very relatable, how he was like, that's great. Now now I have to wake up and, don my coat and get to my quarter station. And I believe at the end of the battle as well, he ended up having to take an additional watch afterwards too. Like, oh, guess what? Now you're promoted. You have to take the first lieutenant watch, which is the day watch now too. Like, oh, fantastic. Like, it's very, very relatable to very authentic to the Navy experience, I suppose.
Yeah, I really liked how you jumped right into the action, and then I really got to know. I felt like I got to know James and where he's at mentally. It was a really good introduction, right, to both the action that we're going to see and the main characters that we're going to be dealing with, and really framed up really well, like who they were in the beginning of the story, right? Because the purpose of characters is that they changed a little bit over the course of the story, and it was nice to see where they started from, right? And yes, it is a very relatable thing of, I'm exhausted, I'm going to go do this thing. Hey, look, I've been rewarded, but part of my reward is always a downside. So it's pretty cool.
I thought it was interesting. He's rewarded, but it's rewarded from the perspective of, this is very temporary, so don't get used to it. You just kind of get, the bad end of this, and then you're going to get replaced with someone I really care about and really want to be in there as soon as we get to port, which we'll get into. I also want to ask Mark if everything's okay, because he keeps killing people at the beginning of the book. With steps and with Pious, he's like, hey, we're going to introduce people. They're dead now. And I don't know, Mark, if that was something you set out to do. And of course, I'm joking a fair bit here, but you're sort of like, oh, cool. He's got this sort of person he's behind in sort of the leadership, and then that guy dies. So is that something that was intentional, or are you trying to just make this part of the plot and just happens to coincide with how the beginning of Steps to Deliverance ran as well?
This is going to sound so trite, like I've prepared for a pun, but everyone's got one good novel in them. I just keep writing the same novel again and again and again. And if you ever read any of my Infinity stuff, you're like, oh, so you just wrote Steps to Deliverance again, but gave them guns? Yeah, kinda. There's again, it's like there's nothing clever or original with it. It's if you start off and go, bang, here's some dead people, you're kind of saying the contract you're making with your reader is that this could happen later on, that it's not just going to be like the A-Team, where a grenade goes off in the middle of people and they kind of get twirled through the air and get up and dust themselves off and cough a bit and carry on. It's saying that that people will get killed off. I don't really like doing it that much. Having these, kind of Game of Thrones-esque stories where the body count is through the roof. Because it's like it's pretty miserable, and also people. I think you run the risk of people won't get invested in characters if they just think, well, he's just going to die anyway. They all do. Which friends of mine who've really got into Game of Thrones said that's kind of where they were by the end. So yeah, it does. It does start off with kind of a bit of bad stuff going on. I don't think I made it clear quite how bad it is for an Age of Sail, for a ship-rigged vessel to lose its main mast as well. That is really bad. That's really bad. And I'm not sure I made that come across as well as I could have done in retrospect. But yeah, it does certainly start with a bit of a bang, I guess.
You did get really close to being able to say, great, well, now it's just a first run Alohi because it lost one of its masts. So the 3-masted Alohi is the interesting conversation I know we've had before of you sort of made a ship that had an extra mast and they were like, well, I guess we have to cut it off now.
Poor junior officers, I have to make a tracker for how many you've killed off in both this book and also in Through Thick and Thin, or maybe one of those occupational safety signs, like number of days since a lieutenant killed 0, always a 0 or something, right? Yeah.
Oh, geez.
But there is one other cool part, I think, of that opening scene that I want to hit on, and I can't remember the exact geometry of the maneuvers, but if I remember correctly, there's a pretty tight, close point of approach between the orc smasher and Alohi frigate, and the crew and especially the commanding officers kind of see each other, and I remember that being a really, really awesome moment too.
So I read the book, and when I was reading the book, I read it knowing that I was going to be talking on the podcast. So I'm making notes, right? So here's this guy, here's James, and then so here's the first man. Okay, I'll just scratch him out. Okay, so don't worry about him anymore, right? But the reason there were two things out of that scene though that were really important. The first is you got a named character. It's not just the guy next to the lead character got killed, right? It's this dude had a name. I thought that was going to be invested in the guy. Bang. So that very small device made me understand the stakes, right? It made me understand the stakes. Every single character has a name, right? Every single character has a backstory. You don't know it, right? But it's important. And second, it was after the battle was done, Charn's response and being like, I really am going to miss having him. He was solid. I knew he was going to be great. He's an up and comer. All right, well, I have to go and I have to give it to James. I don't want to. He's the person that I don't really want to choose, but he's the only one left. So this is the guy I'm going to choose. That attitude of, all right, stiff upper lip. We need to move on. This has to be done. It really gave us an insight into who Charn was going to be, right? And his understanding of naval warfare and his understanding of what the stakes are, right? Which I thought was really good. Having someone crucial to the chain of command be removed right in the beginning and having to have them adapt was also very smart. It was well done.
Yeah, I was definitely not knocking the overall process there, Mark, when mentioning that, because I think the difference between, again, Steps and Pious is in Steps, the death drives the focus for one character through most of Steps to Deliverance. Orion is driven by what happens at the beginning of the book for years into the future until he's sort of really just comes to terms with what's going on. And in Pious, the death is, oh, that's very unfortunate and very bad for us, but literally cannot change who we are. We have to keep moving forward. We have to keep the progress of the ship. We can't slow down. Someone has to step in to fill that gap. No matter how many times that gap is emptied by a cannon or a sword or a giant splinter of wood or whatever it is, that gap has to be filled because of how the ship works and how that chain of command works, how the process on board has to be maintained. And so it is a rough introduction into a lot of people are going to die here. So maybe don't get comfortable with everyone. But at the same time, everyone is very valuable. Every person is very important. And so when a death happens, even if you don't know them, even if you don't have this lengthy character backstory and you love and understand them, the other characters see them as important and see them as valuable. Even characters that they don't like, characters that they're like, not a big fan of that. And when they die, they're like, that's a bummer. Like, that's really bad because of how that impacts everything else in the flow and everything else in the process for running the ship and running the sort of mini fleet that they get into later. So it is a great introduction into this book is going to be bloody. Please don't expect everyone to live. And that is the contrast between orcs and Basileans on that, where orcs are like, I don't like you, kill you, next person. The Basileans are like, that's bad that this person died. Who can fill the shoes? Who can fill that gap? How can we really balance that back out? So death on both sides having a very, very different feel just from the get-go. Any other thoughts on that first battle, that first sort of scenario that they were in? Okay. All right. Well, let's jump ahead. And one thing for me with shifting in the book, going from, and I always hate to call them vignettes because I know we mentioned that in the Celestians, the Rise of the Celestians book, that they are vignettes, so like little fragments of the story and you jump through. This is more cutting from scene to scene. So you get a lengthy scene and then you move forward. And then we jump into the Martolian Queen and you get Caitlin. You get sort of her introduction. She's getting chased down by orcs and it's a really, really bad situation. Her ship is purely about survival. They know they can't win. Even a small orc ship is a tremendous threat to just a regular merchant ship. And so there's this massive change in between the Navy, who's like valiant, we're going to do the fighting thing and we're going to survive, we're going to rescue people, and her ship is just like, we got to try to live. We have to live to face the next day, sacrifice everything, keep the ship alive. So her introduction is a very, very different introduction, albeit there's still a lot of chaos and a lot of bad things happening. Alex, what were your thoughts on bringing in the Martolian Queen and how you felt when that happened?
Yeah, that whole scene was another, like the whole book, a fantastic scene. It sets very well, I believe, the contrast between the Navy ship and a merchant vessel as well. But you really feel the stakes of like, oh man, like these orcs are coming. We got to get away fast. There's a character in that scene, a very minor character. I don't think we hear about him really much ever again in the book. And Mark, please correct me if I mispronounce his name, but I think it's Wurio Owen. He's a kind of like the annoying like corporate guy on the ship that's has something to do with the cargo. He's like from the trading company or whatever, and doesn't quite realize like, oh, like, you know, we might die from these orcs or whatever, and starts getting upset with Catelyn for throwing all the cargo overboard. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, you know how much that costs? And she replies back something along the lines of, no, I know exactly how much it weighs, and keeps throwing it overboard so they can lighten the load and get out of Dodge faster. And I thought that was another good use of kind of a clueless bystander to help explain the stakes, and just really love that scene. Very risky scene, like Shoalwater's no joke if you run aground, and that they would have gotten stuck on the rocks out there.
Yeah, you got to wonder if these people are real. I mean, that's a one-dimensional bit character who's just in there for a second, I guess. It's just there to set up Caitlin to say this is who this person is. And it's kind of like Carter Burke in Aliens. It's like, okay, so people are getting massacred here. So let's nuke the site from orbit. Do you know how much it costs? You know, it's like, do people like that really exist? Are there people that stupid? I don't know, but it tells
They do
the story.
exist. They do.
Yeah, I guess the idea of setting up that character, and you know, you got the bit where one of the top men gets wounded quite badly up on the yards, and Caitlin getting shot at goes up to rescue him, and I wanted to set up a character to kind of say, look, just because they're civilians, that they're armed civilians, which was in the Age of Sail a thing, that was absolutely the norm. But there is a massive, massive difference between saying this is a 8-gun civilian ship and an 8-gun naval ship. One has guns with people trained how to use them, and they know what they're doing. And just because these people carry weapons, you know, it'll be terrifying to think, I never thought I'd have to use them. And these pirate attacks, even in areas where pirates exist, you kind of people going through for a whole career never seeing a pirate, and it's something that happened to the next ship. And so yeah, I kind of wanted to say, look, here's a crew of professionals who they're not cowards. They've braved weather, which actually, you know, the seas in those days killed a lot more people than pirates did. So these are brave, professional, resourceful people, but they have no idea how to fight because they wouldn't. And that's maybe a bit too realistic, because when you start to look at really popular franchises like Pirates of the Caribbean, where like Keira Knightley's character is, I've been dating a blacksmith who makes swords for 6 months, so now I'm Zorro. And it you know, it's like, yeah, that wouldn't happen. That's a lifetime skill. That takes and learning how to fight a ship is a lifetime skill. That's why people go into sea at the age of 8 and stuff like that. You know, but you know, that's not knocking Pirates of the Caribbean at all. It's a fantastic story, and it's a hell of a lot of fun. It's great. Maybe I should have been a bit more like that and a bit less historical. I don't know. That was the idea of that scene anyway, to just set up, here's a different ship. They're really good at what they do, but what they do is not shooting and swinging swords.
I think it was interesting to see her set up as you get introduced to her, and her first thought isn't, how do we fight? How do we stay alive by engaging in combat? It is, how can I save my people and how can I save the ship? Because that's what really matters the most to her. And her perspective on it doesn't really change for her caring about her people and caring about her ship later on. But you're introduced to a person that has a different relationship to her job than we just saw on the Pious, where they have a job and it's very distinct and they're in their role. And yes, they want to keep the ship alive. They want to keep people alive, but they have this job that is kind of overlaying everything. And her job is really preserve this thing, make sure that we can live to sail another day, trade another day, whatever it happens to be. And her character is driven by very different forces than we have in the Basilean Navy. And there's an underlying level of needs that she has and requirements that are put on her that drive her character in a very different direction. So a great introduction to who she is. Mike, what are your thoughts?
It's cool because a lot of the characters have moments of heroism within the book, right? And the moments when they do these great, cool things are motivated by different things. So Caitlin's is, in the whole beginning of the book, is about saving lives. It's very people-centric, right? So I'm going to go and I'm going to save the guy that's in real danger up in the up in the sails, and I'm going to climb up there, and it's okay if I get shot at because this is important, right? I'm going to toss all the cargo over, and I'm not going to worry about the financial ramifications, dude, because I got to get us out of here. I got to keep my crew alive, right? More than anything else, the people are most important, right? And so her moments of heroism have to do with that in the beginning of the book. As opposed to the Basilean naval people, who are their moments of heroism are in service to the structure of the ship and the mission, right? And so to highlight what everyone else has been saying, like that is super cool, because once again, you're getting a feel for these characters right up front. What do they value? What motivates them? And what is going to be the bellwether under which they're going to make these other decisions later on, right? So it was super cool. And also, action, right? Okay, we're in trouble. Let's get some tension. Let's build some action. This book went from action sequence to maybe not a lot of action, but definitely a lot of tension when they get back into port, and then more action, and it alternates between action tension. Really well done. Because of that, there wasn't a lot of like downtime, which again, real page turner because of that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also liked and oh man, if it's not in this moment, then forgive me. And I'm gonna probably not say this name right, so Mark, get me corrected. Her salamander first mate, Ixand.
That's the thing with all these names, you kind of write them out, and you write them out 1,000 times, but you never say them. And then one day someone says, "We're going to make an audio book of this. How do you pronounce this?" And you go, I don't know. I never really thought about it. Zand, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so Zand says to her, I have a pistol and your name is on the bullet because the rest of us will be sold into slavery by orcs, but it's going to be way worse for you being a woman in this environment. And again, stakes for her being very different than those around her, but having people that care a lot for her, having a first mate that really has that good relationship, and you see their interactions throughout the book. You see that relationship they have is they are friends, they are coworkers, but they sort of start brushing against that line of really caring about each other in that family sense. And again, just a great introduction to see he's really the only person of her crew that we get to know. And he's like that one insight to the rest of her crew, which is very different than the Basilean side, where you have 10 different people that get names. And on her side, she just has this one person that's sort of iconic in the story for her.
Yeah, I guess that sets up the relationship between them quite a lot. If I wrote Pious again now, I don't think I would write that line in. It's I think that was still the hangover of Faith Aligned and these dark themes, because that's quite a dark thing to hint at, which I really I wouldn't sort of do that again. And also now that orcs have been developed more, well, they wouldn't. They'd just sell everyone into slavery, or they'd just kill everyone. They wouldn't care about any difference between them. It's just we either kill them or we make money out of them. That's that. And I think that's how Mantic orcs operate. But also, just because that's how Mantic orcs operate doesn't mean that's what a salamander thinks is going to happen. So maybe it does work because it shows the potential brutality of that character in being kind to a friend in a strange way.
It's interesting too because you mentioned later, like when we're in Gurok's head, he makes the offhand observation. He's like, "Listen, I know what a good-looking human woman is, because they sell for more money when I sell them into slavery, right? That's the only reason why he knows that. Like, he doesn't care, but he's like, well, that set of attributes will get me a couple extra gold pieces, right? Like that totally is in line with their way of thinking.
Yeah, that I suppose, it is a more orky way of looking at it rather than salamander thinking I know what an orky way of looking at it is. Yeah.
From Zan's perspective, it's also, I mean, they're pirates, and the human pirates, that's an absolute concern. Like, that's valid from, if it was human pirates, yeah, okay, that's understandable. And maybe his brain is just, it's pirates. We're just going to do what we would have to do in any situation just in case, because it's probably unlikely that he spent a lot of time really trying to figure out the difference between orcs and human pirates in terms of how they interact with female prisoners. Probably not the greatest amount of time spent there. So it was completely understandable. And I didn't think it was too dark. I think it really showed the decisioning that had to be made at that point in time by someone that obviously cared about her very much, and driving a moment of, she's so important to me, I will kill her rather than her have to go through something horrific, which I'm okay going through, but I can't let her go through that. And even if it was just slavery, if it was just whatever happens down the road, I don't want her to have to deal with that. And I didn't feel it was too dark. If you hadn't gone that way, it would have been fine too. It wouldn't have affected things negatively. But I think it gives a good insight into Zan's perspective.
Yeah, it's supposed to be sort of the close relationship. He's the Chewbacca to her Han Solo, I guess, and the enormous lumbering sidekick running the trade ship. So yeah, he's just doing what Chewie does, looking after Han. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to slide over to the next sort of piece, and this is where we get into, or out of really, the main conflicts, and we sort of step back into the rest of the story. It's where Basilean Marine friends join. This is when there's a few things that happen on the Orc end. There's a lot going on with James and his mental state on what's he going to be doing, how is this life going to look, as the sort of pieces start aligning for later on. I don't remember who mentioned it earlier, but talking about the Basilean Marines and how them joining the ship, you get that. I think it was you, Mark, mentioning that's the window. That's the reader's window into a life that they don't know very well. It also, to me, brought in the ability to have a group of people that could begin to relate, and obviously by the end of the book you see that, but begin to relate as the reader does into really falling in love with how that world works and how the different elements of the ships work together and the life that they live and how important everything is. And it's not pretty and it's not fun and you don't get to go on parades, but everyone really works together and there's a lot of focus into that. So Alex, as being someone that's been on ships, probably didn't have Basilean Marines join you, but what were your thoughts on having that window, having those fresh eyes, having that perspective come in?
I'll say that, just that the whole sequence after the battle, or after once Pious returns to Thatraskos, and again, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that word, but once they return, that whole sequence is when I thought the book, I was like really sold on the book with the way the whole sequence played out, because so much of the thoughts and what was going on between the ship's company and to a lesser extent Karnan coming on. I think Karnan's the name of the Marine captain. Was just very, very relatable, So we're inside of James's head, I think in the book he's 26 years old, and I think pretty much every junior officer in the Navy is going through is this my career, or am I going to separate and try to start a new career in their head? I'm same with me with my time whenever I was on active duty too, and ended up kind of going the halfway route to be a reservist and kind of staying half in, half out, I guess, but. Everyone has those thoughts of like, do I like being underway so much? Like, do I actually have a good career path forward? How am I doing compared to my peers? Which Mark did a fantastic job of bringing in a peer. If not immediately upon returning to port, maybe a few scenes later, bringing on a peer of James's, roughly the same age, who was already in command of a frigate by that point. And I've seen that before too, where like I've seen peers promoted ahead of me or whatnot, and kind of seeing the thoughts go through the mind there was very realistic. But the one part I really want to talk about on the return to port scene is the first night out that they all have. You kind of see like three different perspectives on we're in port now. What are we going to do? And one is you see the insight into Captain Charn, where someone asks him, I can't remember who, about his wife, and he says, don't ask me about my wife, and he kind of see the thoughts in his head about the failing marriage there. And that's one very real thing that, Mark, I'm sure that you probably saw some with some of your time at sea. Not everyone being very happy with the military lifestyle that the significant other's on. The other one was someone, I can't remember which one of the junior officers wanted to wear their officer's uniform. Like, I'm an officer, I'm out in town, ladies are going to love this. And I think that's, without being too too on the nose, that's oftentimes not the way that most junior officers think. And if anyone is trying to do that, usually other junior officers will make fun of them incessantly, and that's kind of what happens in here. Kind of reminds me of a time that we audited one of my friend's Tinder profiles about a decade ago, and he had like a couple of uniform pictures in there, and he was endlessly derided about it. So seeing one of the junior officers of the book try to go out in uniform was kind of the old-timey version of that, I suppose. And all the shit that they got from the other officers. And then the other part was like the just dressing ridiculously. I think it was Karnan. It says something about some strangely colored pantaloons and whatnot. And really trying to, I guess, peacock out there and get ladies. So yeah, but all of them, I think, mostly tried to get away from the one part that's the bars that are closest to port. I think James says are the ones where most of the crew go to get drunk as fast as possible, and he's trying to go further out. And that also rang very true among the junior officers and ship company. They avoid the parts right off base and head out. So just so much going on here with the return to port that I felt really sung out to me and found very relatable.
Yeah, that characterization, or that the banter back and forth, really rang true to me too. It was really everything here when it came to the stresses and the actions really really spoke to me. I have a lot of I am not in the military, but I have a lot of friends who are, and having spoken to them and having them join the military right before 9/11, right, and having them go through their careers and speaking to them about kind of how it works. It's very interesting, right? So you hit on the head on some of this stuff, and you didn't dive in too deep. It was just brush against this, brush against that, and let the reader read into it what they will, right? Which I thought was really good.
Yeah, perfect amount of detail in my opinion. Yeah,
there's definitely some like silly references in there. The brightly coloured trousers thing. Obviously anyone who's kind of military or military adjacent or whatever it might be will know that a Marine and a soldier are very, very different things. But we've kind of described here the Basilean Legion, that these are Marines, but these are guys who 2 months before the Basilean Marines did not exist. It's just been set up. So these were soldiers. And the brightly coloured trousers thing is a reference to there are some areas within the British Army where it is seen as a massive thing of pride and tradition to wear the loudest coloured trousers possible whilst in semi-formal attire. So like proper abrasive purple, all these things. So yeah, it was just a silly nod towards that, which I've had a couple of people get in touch with a kind of, just a one message thing on social media going, I got that reference. And it's like, good. If 2 people got it in the world, then it was worth it.
I thought it was interesting with the onshore activities, and it is kind of throughout the book. She gets more later on in the sort of lull between the action before the final battle. The onshore activities, there's a very big difference as the reader in the onshore activities versus on ship, and you can feel the formality of everyone drops down dramatically when they're on land. And yeah, obviously you still have to salute commanding officers when you walk into the room, but it is a very different feel. It's a very different part of the story when they're on land versus when they're on ship. And so you get a different idea of how that world works. And again, it draws you back in as the reader into the characters and showing you those different perspectives and showing you those different pieces of how that works. I thought, and again, there's a lot of crossover with the storyline, and forgive me if I'm mismatching some things here. But when Caitlin has her ship back in port and she's starting to get into the discussions of what happens next, how can she financially recover from this? And the reality is she can't. And she has to go through these steps of, okay, what are my options? And they're basically sell your ship or become a privateer. And she can't sell the ship because she views that that's the thing her dad trusted her with, and she can't let him down. And these things are going through her head. But she also has no experience as really in warfare, no experience in warfare whatsoever. And so she's put in this really awkward and uncomfortable position of, I have to make a decision. Either one is bad. And then having to sort of play up okay, if I'm gonna have to get some help in this, it's gonna have to be from the Basilean Navy, which also isn't the easiest thing ever. And so there's these sort of conflicting lines for her of how that has to work. And then of course James gets thrown into the middle of it, and he's tasked with the normally for everyone else enviable task of trying to get her on the side of becoming a privateer when she doesn't want to, and he really doesn't want to be there either. So talk me through that transition, both for Caitlin and the introduction of James into her story, And we'll start with Mike, if we can, is just kind of how did you feel going through that? What were your thoughts in that part of the book?
It was super cool. I really like how when they met at the yacht club, James is honest with Caitlin, right? And so just the framing of the scene, Caitlin is the one that has to make the decision, right? But Mark does not have Caitlin as the point of view character. He has James as the point of view character, right? And so what that allows us to do then is James is you're once again you're taking the opportunity to realize more about James's mental situation, right? It's like, I don't know if I would suggest that you do this. I've been thinking about getting out as soon as I possibly can. These are the reasons why it's probably not a good idea. And you can see through the facial expressions and through the body language of Caitlin that she is processing on multiple levels what James is telling her, right? As opposed, and you get the feeling that if James had come in and been like, the Navy's great, you should do this, right? These are the things that you should that it's gonna. You have no other choices. That Caitlin would have resisted that, but to have the scene play out in such a way that James is the one who is making the the argument, both for and against, so that Caitlin has all the information available for her to make the decision, and not get into Caitlin's head about going through the calculus of it, was very well done. Because if you write that scene the other way, where Caitlin is the point of view, then you're not getting anything with James, right? And I don't think you're getting the same depth of understanding as James, and you're also kind of not. I don't know. I think it works better that way when you lay it down. I was very impressed with it as a scene.
It's interesting that you pick up on the point of view side of things. I was really lucky in the university. I had an opportunity to do as a minor module for 3 years. I did back-to-back minor modules in fiction writing. So I had a novelist for 3 years in this small group at university, formally tutor us in like the science of it rather than the art of it. And point of view was a huge thing. And you see this, and again, it's so easy to give first-time authors a hard time. We've all been a first-time author at some point, and it's intimidating. But one of these kind of mistakes is the omnipotent narrative, which 100 years ago was really popular. So you can read you can read world-famous novels and go, yeah, but this dude had a scene where you jump from head to head to head to head, and you see everything. It's like, yeah, that's old school now, because the way writing has evolved, you're very, very careful in picking your point of view for each scene, because you want the reader to see a whole lot of something and you want to hide everything else. Because if the reader susses it out, by the way, again, show, don't tell and all this stuff, by you just conveying a little bit of emotion from another character, a twitch of an eyebrow, whatever it might be, the reader will subconsciously feel that they have unlocked something, that they've sussed something out, and it's kind of rewarding. So that's the kind of thought process behind it. So yeah. So certainly that scene, just like a ton of others, who the point of view character is pretty essential.
I'm thinking a little more about that scene too. Even leading up to the scene about with Kathleen and James at dinner. The scene before that where Admiral Jarrus and Captain Charn are kind of hatching up the plan and, like, come on, take her out, whatever. I viewed a lot of that, and Mark, you can tell me this is intentional or not, but through kind of a comedic lens, I've got this great plan to woo over this lady to the Basilian cause or whatever, I'm thinking that was intentional. Maybe not. You'll have to correct me if not, but then it further compounds to me, whenever they actually get to the lunch, James is trying to make the small talk, like something like, "Oh, nice weather, isn't it?" And Kathleen cuts him off abruptly with "We're not here to talk about the weather." And like, "Okay, well, what can I get you to drink?" I'm like, "I don't drink." It's like, oh, like, just you really feel like kind of some comedy and all the awkwardness that James is going through, and it's one of the scenes that really makes me feel for the character and relates to being asked to do kind of like weird things. I think there'd be a lot of HR problems with some kind of plan that's hatched up in the Navy today. But, various hey, go escort this admiral from here to here type thing and not going well type stuff is, I think, a pretty relatable junior officer experience in the American Navy.
I think it refers back to that thing I said earlier about the risk of trying to be comedic, because one of the worst things in any movie or book, whatever it might be, is when someone thinks they're funny and they're not, and you're kind of like cringing. Yeah, trying to put these bits of comedy in was a risk, because it's like if this falls flat on its face and people don't think this is funny, it's just going to come across as kind of juvenile and cringe. So, but it was supposed to be funny. Pretty much every scene that Admiral in is supposed to be. It was, I think, my favorite character to write, because you're just basically writing about a guy who, and again, we base this on a different era in history, where an admiral being half, in fact, the entire Royal Navy being half drunk because all these stuff in tradition, that fresh water is a real commodity at sea back then, a real commodity, and rum. Well, yeah, rum's going to hang on in there for you. So rum you can take to sea till the cows come home. It's going to be all right. So yeah, sailors are, by today's standards, over the limit. They're drunk, and so that's a kind of cultural thing. And I'm certainly not for a second, kind of. You can always risk upsetting people with anything, of saying, okay, so you're making light of drinking. And it's like, no, it's not about that. It's we've got this aging diminutive admiral who is half drunk all the time and comes out with ludicrous ideas and stupid plans for his subordinates to try and make reality. And it is very deliberate that every single scene that admiral is in Pious, through thick and thin, and when he cameos in a flashback in Last Light, which is coming out in December, every single scene he offers drinks and is drinking, without exception. And you get this one flash at the end of Pious of the serious side of him, that something happened at some point and the guy's broken, he's heartbroken, and it's a facade. And actually, it's a kind of, I tried to do it just this little bit of, he's not just an idiot, he's coping. He's coping with something that happened. And as an author, I still haven't decided what that was. Just that actually, let's not just make it all hilarity. That let's try and give some depth to the character, because he's in it enough. But yeah, it was supposed to be comedic, that he just comes up with these stupid things, and they work. And just kind of as we see again, without cutting ahead too much, while we are in the spoiler section, to the opening scene when we first see him in Through Thick and Thin. James, what was the last thing I said to you? That something along the lines of, you'll never get promoted past captain. No, the one before that. Yeah, that I can see you in a year being captain of your own frigate with a stunning pirate queen at your side. It's like, and what happened? What happened, young man? And it's like, exactly that. So these things do kind of, kind of come about. So he's either an idiot or an eccentric genius, and it's up to the reader.
I think there's an interesting contrast between him and Charn. They're both long-running naval officers in the Basilean Navy, and it does point to what he says at the end of the book, as you can be a captain, but you can't be an admiral, because you don't have the ability to basically go get your people killed and take on that responsibility, that burden, that weight that hangs onto your soul forever. Because Charn doesn't have that weight. He has the weight of the people under his command, but it is the try to keep everyone alive, not sacrifice everything for an objective. And so the contrast between the two of them is very big, and you see them combine on this grand plan that they have. They have James going on, which is absolutely bonkers and shouldn't work, and it really only works because she doesn't have another option. So she is going to probably have to do this anyway, and they send James in as this, grand mission he's going to go on. He doesn't want to do it, but they're sending him in because he's probably the best chance they have to convince her, and really what's convincing her is the massive amount of debt that she's facing. And so it is great comedic. A great comedic interlude. It doesn't play as just, well, this is going to be funny. It plays as a as a reader, you see the humor in it. You would get a chuckle at it when it's in a movie, but you wouldn't just be sitting there cracking up and it being the funniest thing you've ever seen. You get that good chuckle because you're like, okay, yeah, these people are trying to do something really fancy and you don't need to. Like there's the plan is way more complicated than it has to be. And no one really wants to be doing this and everyone just wants to kind of move forward. So I thought it was a great interlude. It was a great little piece to throw in there. And you did get a lot more out of James in that interaction as well.
I think that sums it up really well. The intention, I am nowhere near funny enough or a gifted writer enough to make laugh out loud funny stuff. It was just to try and get a bit of a chuckle and make it lighthearted. And I think you hit the nail on the head with that. That was certainly what the plan was.
All right, if y'all are okay with it, I want to jump ahead to the tavern brawl for the orcs. It doesn't happen too much later. There's a lot going on Gurak's side, and I'd put a few times in the note that Gurak just keeps learning lessons along the way, that he's like, okay, here's this thing, I need to remember that for next time. Here's this thing, I need to remember that for next time. And then yelling at all of his orc subordinates that they're stupid and they aren't thinking about anything. And then he gets into a situation because he's interacting with human pirates and the human pirates don't like them. And then there's this moment of, well, we're sort of bumping up against the human pirates in a way that we're obviously going to have some sort of conflict. And I love the moment that Gurak shares with, I think it was with his lieutenant, when he says, well, basically let's not kill anybody, but if they want to fight, we'll do the whole bar fight thing. It was again another lighthearted moment of these orcs just like, y'all can't even begin to fathom how easy this is going to be. You're trying to take on orcs in a fist fight in a bar and all of y'all are drunk. This isn't even going to be close. So there's a great introduction into them engaging with the pirate populace.
But also, like, Gurak is walking into the tavern. He's got his boys with him, and he has a big red overcoat and a big powdered wig, because that's what captains wear. Captains wear a big powder. So he's sitting there. In my mind, it was like slightly small for his head. It's like kind of glued on off to the side. He's like, I'm a captain. Let's go. Right. And so even turn around and being like, don't murder anybody, with his stupid wig sticking in his head. Like that made me so happy when I read it. Right. Because it's like, there's this, I know that like Mantic orcs in the background, when you read the big, the background book or the fluff in the rules, it's like orcs are made for murder. They murder, they murder everybody, fighting all the time, murder. It's like, how do these people eat? But then like when I read this book, I was like, okay, so this is like characterization. There's a little more to the orcs than what is being presented right in the base background. And I loved it. I love this idea of if I'm an admiral, then I got to look like an admiral, right? Because this is what these humans expect. So I have to wear this stupid wig because that's what these humans expect. I loved that, right? Well, for a bunch of reasons, right? Gurak is trying to make his claim in a world that the orcs don't really understand. And so he's got to kind of act the part. And there's nothing more acting than having a costume. And at the same time, he's picking fights with everybody, right? So he's still him and his orcs are orcs, right? Like I will fight all of you, and I will have no problem doing it. And I'll fight the Basileans, and when I'm done with them, I'll deal with you, and right? Because that's the orc way. It was very well done. It was cool.
I thought it was interesting. Gurak is not comedic, but he's funny. Because you understand that there's these layers on top of him that like he wouldn't have to wear the coat. He's doing that for show. He doesn't have to be this super over the top character, except that he is an over the top character. He is an over the top character just by his very nature. You don't have to basically force that. He just is. That is just who he is. As an admiral, he just is that, and it's not something that had to be added on. And you're like, oh, how do we make this an interesting, funny moment? He's just this character that is orc ramped up to 10 degrees because he's a crudger, and that's just what they have to be all the time.
Right, and it's not like they do nuance very well either. So there's no nuance with any of them, right? It is everything's up to 11, right?
it was kind of a fun thing to do. I know other authors in mine and Mike's stable have done a lot more on orcs since. So they've developed a lot, but there was nothing back then. It was all really new. I wish I could say hand on heart, I planned the character out, and therefore logically he would wear a greatcoat and a powdered wig. But it was definitely the other way around. It was like, I want the orc in my mind to wear a stupid wig. I've got to justify that now. And yeah, that was just sort of immaturity on my part, I guess. But when I first wrote the orcs, because what was different about this book as well was every 3 chapters were going to Mantic, which we don't normally do because these guys don't have time. And I was lucky enough to visit Mantic HQ a few weeks ago, meet everyone, do the tour, and be blown away by how much they achieve, how much output they achieve with what they've got, which is a staff of people who are all doing a million things out of passion for it. So we can't expect every novel we write to be read. There just isn't enough hours in a day. But this one was. So this one, every 3 chapters were going to Mantic, and they were being picked apart line by line. Not in a bad way, because I have written for some people where it's very much, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. Whereas this allowed me to tell the story I wanted to tell. But when I made mistakes with the lore, it said, that's wrong. When I had those little rabble boats with orc captains, they went, no, they don't. Just goblins on those, things like that. But when I first wrote the orcs, because no one had really written them before, they were very GW. They were very 40k. They had Cockney accents, all that stuff. And Mantic HQ came back and said that our orcs, they're not really comedic. They're ruthless, they're deadly, they're brutal, they're horrible. So I did that, but tried to inject a little bit of comedy anyway to rebel and give him a stupid wig anyway. So that bit was definitely my fault and not Mantic's. But I think they probably got sick of me, and I wore them down by that point. So the wig stayed.
I think it's comedic in part because of the understanding that orcs aren't comedic, that orcs aren't funny. If this was coming from a 40k or an old world Warhammer orc aspect of they have those funny parts to them, it wouldn't be funny. It would just be like, oh, it's an orc, that's what he does. But the fact that you get that introduction to the raw brutality of their world, and that nothing is funny, nothing is humorous, nothing is done in any way without specific intent to display power and to force that on other orcs and goblins and everything else. And then he walks into the tavern with this great big coat and wig on, and hat probably nowhere near where it needed to be. It's comedic because they aren't funny. And the ridiculousness of his attire is only amplified by the fact that it's not something that he's doing to be funny or clever. He's doing it because this is what I have to do, and I have to try to be this person and be this thing so that they respect me without me having to kill them all. And so it's funny as the reader to be like, this is ridiculous. Just an orc fills the entire doorway and he's got a stupid wig on. But it is a great piece for that character to have a little bit of ridiculous nature that isn't just trying to make him just out and out funny, because that doesn't fit their character.
I think the only regret I've got is that I've got an orc army for Kings of War, which I've painted up and assembled most of. And I kind of like to do stuff really vanilla. I don't like to do, here's a crazy concept. I like to do it, like when I played, if it was 40k, it would be like Dark Angels guy, do Dark Angels the way the book tells you. All the colours right. I kind of like that stuff. I don't like to make my own chapter or whatever. And so I always do things vanilla. And then I saw, because I've got a 3D printer, like a lot of us have, and saw some third-party company were doing 28mm scale orc pirates. It's like, all right, show me what you got. And there it is. There's the captain that they've made. Powdered wig, stupid big hat, great coat. And it's just like, I'm so disappointed that I had already painted my orcs and didn't make them orc sailors just so that I could get this 3D printed resin dude where someone had clearly has as bad a sense of humor as me and had done exactly the same thing. Which again, I suppose, ultimately, if you say to someone, orc pirate, draw one, you're probably going to come out with something like that anyway. So yeah, it's but it was fun imagery to play with, I guess.
All right, Alex, I got to get you in because I want to make sure before we kind of jump into the next sort of section in the books. Any thoughts on again the orc side of this interlude period? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love a pirate bar book brawl, right? But yeah, I don't have much to say about this section. One thought I had was just like, how does a Crudger even fit into a tightly cramped kind of makeshift building pirate bar with tight tables? I mean, Crudger's supposed to be absolutely massive. I can't even imagine him making it in there, even in the first place.
I would think he just walks wherever he wants to go, like where does a gorilla sit in a crowded theater? Wherever he wants.
Just push everyone away. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I did appreciate the consistency in he's huge. Like the orcs think he's huge and the humans think the orcs are huge. So it's that in your mind, and I don't think you ever gave dimensions to him because he's just big is enough from whoever's facing him. They're not taking the time to measure his biceps and figure out exactly how big he is. It's just, this guy's enormous and I got to fight him. Oh no. That sort of mindset. I appreciated the barroom, the tavern brawl. It harkens back to me really enjoying the swashbuckling movies of yesteryear back when they were black and white, and I watched a lot of those growing up, and the absolutely ridiculous bar fights that you get there, and you see some more in other movies and other media that you consume over the years. And then it is over the top. He just grabs a dude and just hucks him through the wall, and the dude just jumps back up and jumps back into the fight. And Grok's kind of like, oh, okay, I can kind of respect that through a wall, then you come back into the fight. So this is a worthwhile adversary kind of a moment that he had.
So Mark, even if it was Mantic mandated, we all still loved it.
Yeah, it was. So that was from Vince, who runs Wing to Sar. So I still don't know how much of all of our stuff we do he reads, because he's just the most kindly supportive, avuncular figure. But he's quite quick in his contact. He's quite Brandon, who we deal with a lot. Brandon is a larger than life guy who's always in touch, and Vince is a lot quieter, but then just says stuff, and it's like, are you reading all of this quietly in the corner? But yeah, when he knew this was coming along, yeah, that was mandated. He was just like, yeah, we'll proceed with this, but you must get a pirate bar fight in.
It's absolutely great to have it in there. So props to Vince for requiring you to throw it in. All right, let's jump ahead. The next section, and again, I don't want to be like, oh, I have to talk about these in a specific order, because there's probably going to be some overlap and some overlay. We get three different pieces. We have the orcs doing land raids, sort of going and taking prisoners and doing we got to make some money to get some more cannons to get into the ship because we got to do this thing, and they're trying to play the financial game. And then on the other side, the Basileans shift into, well, we have to protect the shipping lanes. We got to go fight these pirates. There's threats from the Admiralty coming down if this doesn't happen. And then we also have Caitlin going out on her first adventure on her own as a privateer. And the sort of overlay between those of there's some conflict, there's some combat. The Basileans end up sort of kind of undoing a little bit of what the orcs had done, and that they get to rescue the prisoners. And you also have the important transition for Caitlin from being a merchant that is forced to become a privateer to making some really good decisions and winning her first privateer fight just through tricking the enemy into getting them close and knowing, hey, if they get close, they won't be expecting us. They won't be expecting us to suddenly turn on them and make it about taking over their ship and not trying to survive on our own. So thoughts on those again? There's a few different paths before we get into like the ground fight, which we'll talk about on the island. But those three different sort of naval engagements that each side gets into. We'll start with Mike on this one.
I mean, to be honest, it's fun. I mean, this is the part of the book where just from a reader, again, it goes from action sequence to action sequence, and it's fun to watch. It is interesting that there's two things that come to mind here. The first one is that Caitlin is now new to this new to command in this role. She's used to running a ship, but not from a fighting capacity, right? And so the decisions that she makes are somewhat informed by her previous role in being like, they won't expect us to be a military ship because I don't expect us to be a military ship either. I mean, so that in and of itself is good, as opposed to the bravado of let's go get them, right? She approaches the topic a little differently. The other thing is with Gurak, it's funny because Gurak, you had mentioned this earlier, Nate, he loses more than he wins, right? In a lot of these engagements, he's still kind of figuring it out. He has weighted numbers. He has this giant hulking ship. He's got the element of surprise. The fact that the Basileans can't find him is certainly working for him. Over and over again, he sort of wins, right? And then I think it's in this section where he captures a couple ships. He scores a giant victory, right? Which is enough to sustain him for the rest of the book, right? In a lot of ways, right? Showing that he is not just comedic relief, the bad guy that gets beaten and runs off and then goes, "I'll get you next time, Pious." Like he's legitimately dangerous, right? But once again, it's like these action sequences were fun. They were really good to read. I really just Candyman. It was great. I don't know if I'm actually adding any value to the discussion, but like that's how I felt reading it.
No, I think you're spot on. Yeah, absolutely. Alex, what did you think?
Yeah, Mike, you're saying it, so I don't have to. I agree with you on all points there. I want to think before they got into kind of like I guess I'll call like the mid-book like naval action sequences. There's a lot of setup to that, I think, too, that really drew me in. And kind of a recurring theme we hear from this podcast is I like the action scenes, but I love all the setup to them too, all the stuff happening on shore also. And I remember that. I can't remember the name of the captain, but it's the one that was kind of James's peer that had command of his own frigate, comes to visit Pious, and it's kind of like an offensive visit from Charn's point of view. Like, you came over uninvited and kind of acts a little disrespectful in the captain's cabin or something. And
yeah, I think his name is Strifus.
Strifus.
He has the word strife in his name, right?
You saying it right, Mark? Is that the right way?
Oh, geez. Yeah. I think so.
We get to determine what it is, so it's good.
Yeah, it is. It's that. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. And I think later on as well, I can't remember exactly what else happens that kind of upsets Charn, but Charn, as the leader of the frigate squadron, I think makes Strifus give up an additional set or all the sailors to go and crew the Martolian Queen. Again, not sure I'm saying Martolian right. And yeah, the whole training sequence as well with James and all the sailors. And remembering now, but those are sailors that James isn't familiar with because they came from either Martolian Queen or from a different ship too. So kind of shows his leadership to bring that team together for their later successes down in the book. For instance, taking the brigantine and the next kind of action sequence. And also it kind of harkens to, I know historically the British Navy has had really fantastic gunnery drilling and whatnot in the Age of Sail and whatnot. So maybe it was a little bit of a nod there, Mark, to, you have to train to be good at what you're doing. And gunnery was an example of that historically for British Navy.
I did like, too, that after the fight sequence where James and Caitlin are fighting together back to back, right? That I think it was very telling to Mark's earlier point of civilians don't really know what they're doing when you hand them a cutlass. But they can shoot a pistol. So Caitlin's got a pistol. She has two pistols. She essentially has two shots. And then she freezes, and then there's shame because of the freezing, and then she takes that on James in the direct aftermath because violence is a weird thing to have to deal with in the moment and right after. And there was a lot of emotion tied up in that sequence that I really appreciated from a character perspective. Because up until then, you're like, oh, Caitlyn's got this. It's weird. She was just running a trading ship, and now she's running the ship as if it's a fighting ship, and it looks like she's taking to it abnormally quickly. And then you see the emotional effect on it right afterwards, and that was very well done. There's a part of me afterwards I was like, well, how much of that leading up to this was false confidence, bravado, what have you, that I really appreciated, because you still have to be in command even if you don't know what you're doing, right? Everyone's looking at you, right? And that you have to muddle through that in the moment. I thought that was really well done.
The kids call it fake it till you make it these days, I think, Mike.
Yeah, there was like a couple of bits of the character development on that side of it. I think, as you said with James, and they've got this good-looking female captain who just walks past a load of sailors, and so it's getting the equivalent of wolf whistling and stuff, which is really disrespectful. So and we see this instant different side. He's been a very chilled out guy. He's like junior officer who's going to be popular with his subordinates, but not necessarily popular with his seniors. Because yeah. The guys love him. Cool. Does he get the job done? No, he does not. But they love him. And but now we're starting to see someone who's having to step up to the plate a bit more. So what does he do? Straight away screams at them, anyone does that again, I'll have you flogged. And it's like flogging, when you read the historical accounts of it, that's not a mild, that is horrific. It is really horrific what flogging was, what it did to a human being. So we're seeing, that he is more brutal. He salutes her. He calls us, he's showing her the signs of respect, because it's like, I don't see you as a joke. You're a ship captain in your own right, and he hasn't achieved that. And ultimately it's like, okay, what do you need to do as a privateer? You need to get the ship in a firing position. You can do that already. You know how to put a ship exactly where it needs to be, but you don't know how to shoot. So we get all of the gunnery drill and all that sort of stuff. So and then I had, before I even wrote it, I knew where she was going to be at the end of the book, which was a privateer. That was the character development. So there's this slightly less comedic, I've killed some people, I've looked someone dead in the eye and shot them, but they were a pirate. This wasn't some soldier who signed up on the other side. This is someone who in her mind, wasn't driven to it, chose a life of crime. And she's quite black and white. She's quite cold on that. And it's like she's sort of, I'm surprised with herself as to how, on reflection, I'm okay with this. And which makes for a slightly darker side to the character. But a necessary one, I think. Otherwise, it's going to be a sadder journey of someone who's forced to kill, and you can end up going real dark places with that. This bit for me was the character development of the two of those, that they're both being forced to do stuff which naturally isn't them, but it's necessary because this is where the world has thrown them. And I guess that was the point for that side of it.
I find in her character there's this interesting blend of people. So she's got a bit of Estelle from Steps in Orion and everything else with where she ends up. So she's kind of, again, she's not the same character. They are very, very different characters, but you kind of could put them together like posters. They'd be on the same poster as to strong women in combat roles, and how that's different, but there are some similarities between the two of them. And at the same time, she pulls in some of the Elizabeth Swann from Pirates of the Caribbean feel, where she doesn't start out as this super strong character, and she's got to evolve there. She has like her own thoughts and feelings, and of course, as a I am not ever going to say a well-written woman character. I leave that for women to tell when it's a well-written woman character. But from my perspective, she's definitely not one-dimensional. She's definitely not shallow. She's what I would at least begin to expect a well-written woman character to be. And then there's this other side of her where I'm like, I also kind of want her to be Captain Janeway. I want her to be the person that cares about her crew so very much, because she starts off that way, and I want her to care about her crew. How do you be Captain Janeway if you're a privateer? how do you be that person that really does care and people follow you, not just because you win prizes, but because, and she does this, she gives more money to her crew. She cares about her people. She's trying to look out for them, oftentimes at her own expense. And how do you make a character that goes that direction, that has that blend of pieces? And I think she's a really good character going there. And I think that moment of, I've killed people, I'm feeling shame because I froze, but I'm still like generally like, this is a good thing. How do I deal with this moment? And she gets angry at James, really not for any good reason, but then she does have the wherewithal later to go back and apologize and talk to him and re-engage in that relationship, not from a come back and we'll be friends, but from a, hey, I know I did something wrong. And because I know I did something wrong, I need to make this break in our relationship right. Not because there were any necessary romantic connections at that particular moment, but because this is the right way to do things. And this is how I need to be moving forward, not someone that's leaving those broken relationships in the past. So it was a great transition for her. And again, I mentioned earlier, and we debate this later about who goes through the biggest character shift. And it's not that her character shift is so abrupt and weird that by the end of the year, you're like, why would she end up there? Why would she end up in this place? But that she has these really hard moments that she has to get through. And her getting through those means she has to evolve really quickly. I mean, in my head, this is taking place over, I don't know if it's like a month or two. It's not a very long period of time. And she's having to evolve very quickly because she's forced to. She's required to. She doesn't really have a choice. And so she embraces initially this bravado and this aggression, realizes exactly how difficult that can be, and then has to make the decision later, do I continue on this path or not? And she says, yeah, no, this is who I'm going to be. I'm going to be this person because it's the best way to move forward. And not just because I have to. This is kind of who I want to be. This is really the path that I want to take with the rest of my life.
When I wrote the synopsis for this, because when we put these ideas together, you do like a 1-2 page synopsis with a brief, a couple of lines on the major characters, and you send it to both Mantic and to Wing Cassar and say, are you happy? Are you content with this? And for Caitlin, for the character concept, I think the opening line was something along the lines of a woman who has no joy in her life. She was always supposed to be committed, focused, career, really, really respects the fact that her dad is a self-made man who's gone from being built up this trading empire. So she's not a soldier, she's not a fighter, but she's braves all this horrible stuff that happens at sea in an era where horrible stuff really happens at sea. But it doesn't really have any joy, doesn't have any fun, doesn't smile, doesn't laugh, is very serious. And I guess that's part of the evolution as well of the character, is maybe by the end is just that, what's the message, as the cliche is, that sometimes you can realize life's too short, and that maybe just, try and find smiles where you can. And that's part of that character's development. In terms of, does that make the character 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional? Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's like judging a woman as a character. It's tricky, isn't it? And, you're talking about walking in shoes you've never walked in. For every major female character I write, I run them all by my wife, just to get that perspective. Just to say, look, am I like really, really off here? And so I definitely try and get some help with that. And and with all my salamanders, I run them by my son because he's got a gecko. So that means he knows a lot more about reptiles than me. I try and get help with these guys.
I do want to throw in about the salamanders, and it's because salamanders are my favorite army. They're my favorite faction in the lore by a pretty significant margin, for a lot of reasons. But I like their background. I like how things work. And I think you mentioned earlier, Mark, he's Zen's the Chewbacca. And it kicked something in my mind that I'm like, I'm actually really okay with salamanders being the Wookiees in this world. Like I remember Zan jumping across on the brigantine, and he's like, he jumps over and he lands, and his first thing is just like mouthful of human head, just chomps down on somebody's face, and they're absolutely brutal and just killing machines compared to humans, but they're on the good guy's side, and you should be grateful for all eternity that they're on your side, because if they're not, well, then they'll bite your face off. And I really think that's again, hey, Mantic, if you're listening, you may not be listening, salamanders are Wookiees now, so let's lean into that a bit. Jungle-y sort of island. I get that vibe. And I know, Mark, I talked to you earlier, like you need to make a salamander book at some point. This is like a thing that would be awesome for me to experience more of the lore from them. Because it was the fragments, like the little bits of salamanders I've been getting throughout. It was interesting to see a salamander that's very comfortable in their environment. They're on deck on a ship and they have people around them, and this is how they act, versus the salamanders that we saw in Ascent of the Goblin King, where they're lost, they don't know what they're doing, and they're completely out of their element, and they're making bad decisions. And so there's this split between them, and you can kind of see, okay, if they're in their environment, if they know what they're doing, they're exactly who they need to be. And when they're not, it can be really, really bad for them because they get desperate really fast. So great depth of character in two completely different books that you see how they are in different situations. So really, really appreciate them.
I'll just say, Nathan, there's lots of Wookiees. Lots of salamanders also in the next book in this series too. So you got good stuff to look forward to. They haven't started yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely looking forward to seeing more salamanders. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
I put these, like if you were to look at the first, some would say the only 6 episodes of Star Wars, and you kind of like got, so when the Millennium Falcon turns up on the Death Star, Darth Vader's looking out going, that's my son rescuing my daughter with my old astromech and the protocol droid I built as a child. These have all come together. And you're like, yeah, I don't care. It's a cool story. And I've kind of done that a little bit with mine. Things cross over, things link. And the sequel to this links very heavily to Hero Falling and the Salamander character in that. It's not explicitly stated, but there's a huge link there, which is basically if you just go, okay, so there's a salamander with a great coat and a limp who's in both, then you'll see it. So there's more salamander stuff going on as well. So we're kind of juggling a few projects at the moment. So I will book in with you again for the end of the year, and talk all things reptile. But definitely more coming.
Again, salamanders are Wookiees. I don't know if there's anyone going to argue with this now. I think we need to make it canon and move forward. All right, let's jump to. I labeled it in the notes as the final preparations for in the harbor. Like this is. Everyone knows the big battle's coming. As a reader, there's not I wonder what's going to happen next moment. Oh no, we skipped over that. We skipped over the fight on the beach. I want to touch on that because there are absolutely some important things. I talked about Gurok learning lessons kind of throughout this. Gurok walking into the final battle has a big problem, and that is that he's heavily wounded and recovering from the battle on the beach. And he went into the battle on the beach thinking he knew exactly what was going on. He's like, we're outnumbering these people. We're going to overwhelm them. Just run on, slaughter people, do our thing. And then obviously things don't work out his way. He gets shot to absolute hell and doesn't die. And I think this is the introduction. And if this is not the first time, great. I think it's the first time it's been referenced that orcs just don't die as easy as humans do. Any human would have died with half of the crossbow bolts that he had in him. But he's recovering. He recovers way quicker than a human would. And he's got some goblin who's normally repairing sails just stitching away at him, I'm sure with like the thickest twine they could find, versus, fine surgeons threat. This is very brutal and very hasty repair job. But he's up in a matter of days and threatening his subordinates that want to come after him to try and take take advantage of the fact that he's weak. And he's like, you should have killed me when I was in bed. Like, if you wanted to take over, you've waited too long now. You should have killed me when I was almost dead. But now it's too late. We got to move forward. So I think there's this great piece for Gurok, and not that there's nothing on the Basilean side, because there's growth from the Marines. Them showing their true strength. There's a lot going on there, and the fact that they prevent more loss of life. They really just save a gold mine. Like, let's be honest, no one really cared about the gold mine except the people that were way higher up the food chain. But you get these additional pieces and the value of them that the Marines can bring to the overall conflict in that island setting. And then you have Gurok on top of that, and another development in him as a character. So, real quickly before we jump into the final piece, what were y'all's thoughts, Alex, as far as the battle on the beach and sort of the next steps in that process?
Sure. So I got to keep things straight in my head here, because I know that there's two kind of major land battle scenes, right? There's one earlier in the book where I think that the orcs are relatively successful. I can't remember exactly what they're rating, but they capture a bunch of slaves, which sets up the later fight with the Martolian Queen. I remember that one going like rather well for the orcs. And then the next one against the gold mine, which I think is what we're mostly talking about in this section, going a lot less well. And one kind of interesting, clever thing I think in this is that the first kind of land battle happened during the daytime, which you kind of inherently think would perhaps benefit the defenders, because they see them coming a mile away or several miles away and have time to prepare well. The one that goes very poorly for the orcs happened at nighttime instead. So I thought that was just a really interesting kind of a flip of what I thought is more conventional logic, but I guess it's all about who gets a drop on who in this.
The land battle was cool because it showed the Marines in their element, right? So they're on the ship. They don't really know what they're doing. They get deployed, and then at that stage of the game, you see the leadership qualities of Karnan. You see the way that he layers the defenses. He has a plan, and so the first time the orcs land, they're like, "We're going to beat the crap out of this village," and they do, because there aren't enough people there to defend, and they don't have a plan that's very good. You get professionals in there, and all of a sudden, it's a very different story, right? On the other side of it, Gurok lands, he gets shot up, and then he gets saved by his number two, which is not very orky. And so, it's interesting because he actually mentions, he's like, well, my other number two has been doing some reading, and he was thinking that, we have to make sure that there's a chain of command the way the humans do. We need to make sure that like the people with their expertise are put where they belong, and like the humans do, because that's going to give us an edge on fighting. And Gurok is like, wow, he reads too much. But that's his first instinct, is like, yeah, I'm glad you saved me because it's me, but like, you probably shouldn't have done that, right? If you're, once again, these windows into orc culture versus Gurok's growing understanding and his leadership cadre, their growing understanding of what it would mean to actually be effective at sea, as opposed to just being a mob on land, right? And it was cool.
Yeah, the land battles, it was odd because it's like I'd done a load in the last two books, so I should be more comfortable with it. But it's like the story sometimes leads a certain way, and it's like, well, this makes sense for this to happen. But it wasn't as fun writing them. I remember just thinking, again, I suppose maybe because the rest of it was a really enjoyable process of doing something completely new and completely different, and this was a bit like, okay, it's a little bit like the last two. Oh man, I could have amazing nerdy debates about amphibious assaults at night and day. We could do episodes. Second World War, the Japanese, pretty much every assault they did, every major assault was at night. Doctrinally, assaults better at night. Allies, all of the major amphibious landings by day. Because of the complications of setting up for it. But this is big stuff, not 60 greenskins in a few rafts. It's so, yeah, but I don't even know where I'm going with this. I think probably just because it's interesting to, yeah, I hadn't even thought of it. Probably shows.
I think the night fight illustrates that whoever's better prepared has a huge advantage. And if you're attacking and your opponent isn't prepared, attacking at night's perfect because they are there. It's that much more amplified. The force you bring is multiplied simply because they don't know where you are and what you're doing. Versus on land, they can at least see where you are. They can see how many you have and make decisions there. If it's at night, no chance. But if you're the defenders at night and you know where they're coming in and they aren't expecting you to absolutely butcher them with crossbows when they're standing in the open, then the entire script gets flipped because the surprise is on your side. They, at that point, the attackers don't know where you are. They don't know how many you have. And it's just crossbow bolts coming out of the darkness. And the trauma that's inflicted when that occurs. And so, yeah, it flips the script a bit and says, well, the attackers who you might think would have an advantage and think they have the advantage suddenly are heavily disadvantaged. And again, Gurok learning lessons, getting absolutely punished. It was a great little interjection. And I understand you're like, well, this has to fit. It's got to kind of flow. I thought the gold mine was like, put a gold mine on an island. That works. And it's like technically, okay, I could see that happening. But at the same time, like all the Navy people are like, okay, we have to care about it. Like we don't really care about it, but we're told to care about it. So, okay, we could do that.
The final beach scene and the termination, I think, also has a really great moment. And, continuing with my theme of loving a lot of the out of action stuff, I know that Captain Charn comes to pick the Marines back up. And at first he's kind of, there's a little bit of a tense moment. He's kind of, it's post battle, right? So there's a lot of, things aren't quite in order, and Karnon doesn't stand up to greet him or something to that effect or salute. I can't remember exactly what it was. That was viewed as a little bit of a slight at first, but eventually Charn realizes that, there's a pretty bloody battle happened here. And, almost, I think all or most of the mercenaries that were originally there died, but the Marines stuck around and were able to, give more of in their measure, really, really inflicts heavy losses on the orcs for less loss on their end. And, he kind of, I can't remember exactly what Captain Charn's word were at the end there, but something like, that's really good accounting of yourself. And, you kind of see him come into the conversation kind of hot and angry and turn back like, oh, wow, a lot of respect for the Marines in this one.
I think Karnon mentions that basically everyone that died was a Legion person in his eyes because the other guys were ex-Legion. And that was a matter of respect between him and the mercenary captain. Was he came in and he's like, all right, we're in charge. We're going to boss you around. And he's like, the other dude's like, yeah, but you see this on my arm. We're Legion too. So we understand what you're doing. We understand and our objective is the same that your objective is. So treat us with respect. And then Charn comes in and is like, well, what happened? Oh, they were just mercenaries. They don't matter. And Karnon's response is, no, they're Legion. We're Legion. They're Legion. We care. And that's that. It's not conflict. Like you're not seeing direct conflict between the two, but you see them butt heads. And Karnon's coming from the perspective of you're on my turf. This is land. This is where I do my thing. So you best come with respect. And while it's your ship, when I'm on your ship, I treat you with that respect. When you're here, this is my world. And these are the people that I care about. And so make sure that we're on the same page there. And that's, again, mutual respect gained, mutual respect earned between those two characters that strengthens their bond and sort of getting ready for the final fight.
It's been ages since I wrote this, and I don't remember putting this much depth in. I'm going to pat myself on the back here. This went a lot better than I remember.
Good.
I just remember all the silly gags. Yeah.
All right. Well, then let's go back to silly gags and jump into the preparations for the final battle.
One more before we move on really quick, if you don't mind, Nathan. Yeah. So first off, yeah, very very well deserved pat on the back there. And we talked about the religion in Vaseline culture and whatnot. And there's one more note in here I thought you did also that you should pat yourself on the back for, where it's not the really overt religious influences in the Vaseline culture, but you mention Well, first off, Carnon says they bury the bodies together with the mercenaries and the Marines because their ex-legion made no distinction or something like that between where they're buried. And, Captain Charn at first was kind of confused, saying, wait a minute, we're going to bring them back to Bassalia, right, to bury them on Bassalian ground. Like, no, this is Bassalian land. So, in accordance with the customs, the religious kind of setup of that culture, this is an okay place to bury them. And another great little detail there that I think really ties the story in with the universe.
And I think because it will lead directly into what we're talking about next. The religious difference between Legion and Navy is stark, because the Legion is overtly connected to the religious side of things. Yeah, they're the non-religious side of the bureaucracy, but they are always connected to the priest that's there or someone else that's walking with them every day, versus the Navy isn't. And so the Navy is like, oh, we got to do this, right? Like, we have to do your thing, which is take them home. And the soldier, the Legion captain, is just like, well, no, because this is sacred ground as far as we're concerned. This is Basilea. There's a chapel. We buried him here because this is the best thing to do. Versus in the Navy, they're just like, huck body overboard. Hey, they're in the water now. That's about the best we could do. And the difference in how they treat the dead and the respect that they have connects back to the religious, I don't want to say fervor, but the religious nature of their job, and how that's seen in the culture at large. So let's turn from there back to more religion, because religion's fun. But the christening, whole blessing, the thing that the priests are doing when they're back in harbor, getting ready for the final fight. Everybody's ready. Everybody knows what's going on. And there's this thing that the priests are going to do to bless their hulls. And then this ongoing conversation that the captain and the officers on the ships are kind of going through as to, does this matter? Is this important? Is this just a thing that we have to do? I think that, going back to what you said earlier, Mark, about not bringing religion in, it is this debate on deck that sort of, I would imagine, a little bit of what you had in your head of, do we do this or not? Like, does religion matter or not? And I think the captains were split. Some of them were like, yes, no, this is important. This matters. There's a lot going on. And some were like, not really. Like, we're going to do it. Yeah. But
it's an odd thing for me to write, because we're in a fictitious world where people, there's no doubt, it's not about faith and belief. It's about unequivocal fact that these people see their angels. They don't quite see their gods, but they see their angels, that they exist. And so I guess it's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of, is this going to be reciprocated? The gods, the angels, they exist, but are they? If we bless the ship, does that make any difference? Are they watching? And the reason I put that in there, if memory serves, is because of the ship card for the Alohi, for the frigate, that it's got a blessed hull and it's got this upgrade you can get. So it's like, okay, cool. These guys are about to go off and do their final battle, so it's not an 100-pointer now, it's an 150-pointer. Where are you spending your extra points? Well, I'm going to upgrade the hulls. So it was just a nod to the game mechanics again, that, and try and make a talking point out of it, I guess.
That's interesting. I had not thought about connecting it back to Armada. It makes perfect sense, but I also thought it's just very Basilean of them. We're going to pause and do something ecclesiastical and a bit ridiculous from an outsider's perspective of, why would you do this? But kind of, it makes sense. Yeah, I get it, but y'all haven't really done anything religious up till now. But now's the time to invest those extra points, grab those 5 extra points, slap it on your ship, and get the blessed hull upgrade. I like that. I like that thought.
It was interesting to me too that, like, you bring up a good point about this. It's easier to have faith, and I'm using that in quotes, when the Alohi are real. They hang out every once in a while. If you haven't seen them personally, a person that has, and it's like, dude, these things exist, right? And it's not, it's enough for you to accept them as fact. But for when they're having the discussion on the ship, and I can't remember if it's Charn or one of the other captains who's like, I see the lights on the front of the ship. I see them light up very rarely. but I know that they happen. It's not like every single time they go out, it's like boom, blue flame, let's go, punch a raft with 2 goblins on it in the face. Like they wait, they're a little judicious with their blessing, right? So that, yes, it exists, but you can't rely on it in the moment. Is, I think, very telling. Why they go through all the trouble of all the obeisance and the rituals, right? In order to gain the blessing. I thought that was very, very cool.
Yeah, I think but that's quite late on in the book, and some more information's coming from Mantic about the lore, and you so kind of had the idea of the ship, and by this point I kind of knew that similar to what's on the website now. It says something along the lines of these lights go off when they go into battle. It shows that the Elohi are on their side, and I was thinking, always, every time, because angels are busy, there's stuff they got to do, because when Johnny, age 5, prays for a skateboard for Elohimus, they're not the deities, they're not the gods, they are finite. They are finite, they're not the shining ones. So they can't be everywhere at every time. And also, I think from a storytelling perspective, it kind of takes away their value and their punch if they're always there. Every time Basileia goes to war, the angels go with them. It's like, what, every time? How do they lose? What if they go to war and actually they've done all the stuff with the right ideas in mind, but they're the bad guys because they've screwed up. They've made a mistake and they're doing the wrong thing. Do the angels join in then? So I did what I always did, which is overthink this massively and decide it's quite rare when they turn up, which again kind of ties in with Steps to Deliverance, where the Elohi turn up at the end of that. It's quite rare. So yeah, that was kind of the idea with that. It also gives players the choice of when they paint that little flame on the end of the frigate, do they want it to be on fire or do they want it to just be part of the figurehead and make it wooden or bronze or brass or whatever you want it to be? It's you do you. You make the model look cool the way you want it.
So, Mark, you're saying you just went back to the I'm going to make Elohi show up at the end of every book trope again. Okay, I got you.
I've got one book. One book. They literally show up in my Infinity books. I have one story.
No, so the fun thing about this, when you talk our world religion versus theirs, you mentioned earlier that the Elohi are real, like they're a physical, tangible thing that shows up, and so you have to approach, how do we deal with faith, how do we deal with belief in a world where it is physically there, but at the same time, how do we deal with faith and belief that something can help us when they don't show up? It's a lot more obvious and it's a lot more blatant, it's a lot more real than in our world, where we don't expect a deity to suddenly pop out of the sky and be like, hi everyone, I'm here to rescue and save the day. And so the non-expectation of the flame getting lit, but like when it gets lit in the battle, everyone's like, oh yeah, here we go, this is it, let's do this thing. And that's sort of, that's what they're, not that they're counting on it, but that's the hope, is that when we get into this fight, we think this fight's big enough that this is going to matter, that we think this extra investment of time and energy is going to be the thing that sort of pushes us toward victory just a little bit more. What else? So I know there's other stuff that happens while we're in harbor. There's a lot, obviously, more interactions between everyone. So additional thoughts. I know, Alex, you had some about Charn and James and Caitlin and that dynamic.
Yeah, sure. So I'll preface by saying this scene leading up to the big battle, I think, is my favorite scene in the book. So just brief summary, the Charn, I think is after all the blessing ceremony stuff. Charn is hanging out on the quarterdeck with some of the officers in Karnan, and they're kind of shooting the breeze and arguing about the finer points of like what classes of ships are what or something. And Charn just kind of says, like, let's open up a bottle of wine and bring some chairs up here. We're going to take lunch on the quarterdeck. And, this kind of leads into what I was saying I'd fight you before on, like, what character changes the most in the book. And you had offered up Caitlin as that person. I really see this as like Captain Charn turning around some, and it gets better. Probably my favorite scene in the book is whenever James returns to the ship, I think, kind of while this is all going on, all the jubilation and the atypical camaraderie happening on the quarterdeck. And he comes back from the underway in which they had the big fight and captured the brigantine and whatnot. And, Charn goes to see what James is up to, and he comes back and he says something along the lines of, "Oh, I was just a minor participant in all of it." Whenever Captain Charn is trying to give him mad props, great job. And, he kind of goes, and Caitlin then comes on and basically says, no, like, he was like really instrumental. He did this, he did that. He was like, he held us all together. Like, I can't believe how amazing he was. And then James is kind of like clearly overheard of all that we learn at the end of it all. And just, in that whole scene that just is just so great to me. And Caitlin is like the patron saint of anyone who's ever done the right thing when no one is looking, or like had done their hard work and gone unnoticed, like making sure it got noticed. So I thought that was all really fantastic.
So Alex, in arguing that she didn't have a lot of character growth, you just said she had a lot of character growth. So good job making my point for me.
No, sure, she had growth too. I just think that Charns was more, is all I'm saying, for the fight.
Oh yeah, no, and I don't disagree. When we talk over who's your favorite character in a bit, we'll probably have a little bit of agreement and really saying that's actually probably a pretty hard thing to pick out. I think James, he was in the depths of I've got to get out of here despair when he came back, because he was like, he kind of vibed what was going on with Caitlin and her crew, and he's like embracing who he could be, like, oh wow, this is really awesome. And then it turns on him really fast, and he comes back into port as the victor, but he doesn't feel like it. And his next thought is, okay, I'm about to resign. Like, I've got my papers drafted up. I'm out of here. I'm gone. And she intentionally goes back, and with humility and with a significant amount of grace says, no, like he's the one that changed things. He's the one that helped us survive, not just win, but come back alive. And so it's a telling moment for him to, one, be aware of it, but also for her to take the time and go through the effort, and again, try to repair what she can of that relationship, simply because it's the right thing to do. And her character getting to that next step of, okay, this is who I have to be. I've got to be the Janeway. And again, I bring her back in because that's like this moment where it's like, yeah, you're the captain, and has to make the right decision at the right time. And you did that.
But also on a personal level too, right? Like, she, after some introspection and talking to Zant, she was like, yeah, I really probably should not have treated him that way. And so just on a human level, I need to go back and apologize. I need to also, while I'm doing it, make sure that everyone else knows, if I'm going to get asked, what did he contribute? He contributed a lot, right? I mean, don't let him be modest for whatever reason, which I think was also important, right? So there's a personal level and a professional thing going on at the same time with that interaction, which is pretty cool.
I liked Zan's line, which was something along the lines of, yeah, I may not understand humans, but this is not just understanding humans. This is like, how do you treat people and how should things be done? And you need to do it right, girl. And he took the time as the elder, albeit subordinate to her, to say, no, like, you need to do the right thing here. And she, again, with some humility, said, okay, I'll go and do the right thing after he sort of gave her the path of, this is what you have to do. You have to do this, but I'm going to reinforce and kind of help you tilt that direction rather than resisting it and fighting back against it. Just give her that nudge. It's like, no, go do the right thing, girl. Get it done.
Right. It's also important in this scene too, that this is the most human that you see Charn. He is nervous. He's scared about losing his command. He's given up his entire life for the Navy and for this, to run this ship, right? And to even be remotely have the possibility of it being taken away. He's like, there's two ways to go with that situation. One, you go harder, right? And you go more severe because that fear pushes you into that, or you embrace the moment, you embrace the human beings and the other things that make this worthwhile. And to have him go in that direction sets up the next stage very well, which I thought was cool, right? If you don't get that human interaction now, then what happens later doesn't have the same emotional ring to it. You know what I mean?
He also just had his marriage fall apart. So he just got the letter that was, yeah, we're done. Your Dear John letter.
Right. Right.
Yeah, Mike, it's like you're in my head. That when I wrote the synopsis for this, Charn didn't die. He made it through to the end of the book.
Ooh.
And at about this point, I realised this story is going to work a lot better if he dies. So that's why, obviously, the fictitious character of the captain doesn't know that what's coming. But that point on the quarterdeck is he's given up. That's how I've written it. It's kind of bittersweet that he's just saying, you know what, I give up. I've tried everything. Everything's fallen apart. Let's just pop a cork on the bottle, get everyone here, and just have a drink and talk. Because what's the point? I give up. So you see this more human side of him when it's too late because he's about to lose his life. So it does. It was that the whole point in that was to set up what was coming, because shortly before that, I just realised, like, narratively, as you're planning this all through, roughly, very crudely, two ways to plan a novel. One is you plan it to the nth degree, and you spend ages planning everything out, and then you write it in one go. The other is that you have a rough idea, and then you accept that you are going to do a lot of rewrites when you keep changing your mind slightly. I do the second one, which is I got a rough plan, and we'll see where this goes, and we'll accept the rewrites. And that's what happened with this. It's just like and I remember Scott Washburn of Halfling fame talking to him about it, to him and Brandon was like, keep the body count low, keep it lighthearted. And Scott was, no, sacrifice the characters on the altar of the storyline, kill them. And Scott was very much, sometimes you got to do it. It makes the story, it gives it punch. It makes you fear for the other characters. And so that whole thing, around the whole bit you were just talking about there, Mike, there was a lot of conversations about.
Yeah, it's very well done. It's cool.
Yeah, I think I felt walking into the final fight that you're like, I think Charn's gonna die, man. Like that sort of dread as the reader, and he's not a character that you loved everything about, but as you learn more about him again, you see that curtain part a little bit. You see there's more additional glimpses into his life and his past, into his relational history, and by this time you're getting to the man, I think this guy's gonna die, and I kind of started caring about him. That's rough to have to go through, but it made his death valuable because of everything you'd seen, and it also made everything you've seen more valuable when you get to that stage of, I think this guy's about to die, because everything's fallen apart, and he doesn't go into pure despair, morose, I'm just gonna sit here in misery and sadness. He says, all right, pop the bottles and invite everybody in and make sure that we're all connected before this final fight, because we've all got to be together on this.
Right. It's interesting, but it's funny because when I read that, it wasn't that Charn was going to, and from his perspective, it's not, all right, looks like I'm going to go die. It was instead, my life is going, the way that I have lived it and constructed it is going to be over. And those are two different things. It's a lot different than the guy in the character, the hack character is like, I'm 1 week away from retirement. This is my last go. It's like, dude, that guy's dead. Like you just signaled to everybody he has a giant D on his chest, right? But with Charn, it was different. It wasn't like, this is my last hurrah because I'm going in against unspeakable odds and I'm not going to win. It was just like, if I don't win, I'm going to go be, I don't know, behind a desk somewhere, and I'm going to be a drunk, and that's going to suck, right? And that is, in a lot of ways, a way more human, emotional thing that I think people can relate to, right? If I woke up tomorrow and I got fired from my job, I would have to really rethink about, like, man, that is my career, right? What do I do? Do I have to move with my family? Do I do all these giant things, these giant changes that I would have to implement in order to continue to be, right? And that is really what he's facing there,
Yeah, so I mean, I'm thinking about, what if Charn were to survive and whatnot, and I think that this was set up so brilliantly. To me, it wasn't super telegraphed that he wasn't going to make it out of there. I could have seen like another way in which there might have been like a kind of a rebirth, if you will, like he hit a low point, right? The Dear John letter from the wife, etc. probably not going to make it into the Admiralty, even if he would have wanted that course, right? I mean, it was Winston Churchill or maybe others, but I know Winston famously said, the night is darkest just before dawn, and he had some pretty dark stuff. I could have seen this going in a rebirth type of a storyline instead of a death storyline. So for me, it didn't catch me. It caught me a little more by surprise whenever he did end up passing away in the final battle.
I get that too. Yeah, it wasn't. It was one of those things where, given the amount of death that had happened before, if he hadn't died, I wouldn't have been disappointed, obviously. But I walked into the final battle going, man, I wonder if he's gonna get kick the bucket somehow. Honestly, I thought he was going to be in the position that Elaine Strifus put his ship in. So I went into that final fight thinking we're going to see the action that Elaine took, which, I mean, we can jump into that now. Into the final battle, but the action that Elaine takes, sacrificing himself, his ship, his men, everything to try to get an edge in this fight so that other people can live. And I was like, I think that's what Charn's going to do. And Charn didn't. He didn't. Not only did he not get the opportunity to, he had to watch somebody else do it. Had to watch somebody else sacrifice everything to hopefully give everyone else the chance to win. Which, again, I think is like, in my head, is like, would he have done that? I don't know. But then he actually had to see somebody else do it. And that had to be rough for him to have to go through, I would imagine. So let's jump into the final battle. And it's interesting to me because in the final battle, there's a lot of pieces going on. I made a note that, right at the beginning, Caitlin gets this order, hey, go deal with the rabble. Help them help the sloops sort out what they've got going on, so you can turn and help. And her thought is, I mean, I could do that, but it looks like y'all are outnumbered. And the best thing I can do is go get a blood runner to disengage from everything else, and we fight a blood runner as long as we possibly can. It's not a matter of, are we going to win? It's, well, there's one more ship than we expected walking into this. I'll go ahead and I'll take that on while y'all try to deal with all the other problems that everybody's going to be facing. And then also on the other side, again, you think from the Basilean perspective, again, the fighting against all odds, they're in this really tight position of they're technically outnumbered. They're outgunned heavily by the Smasher. But on board the Smasher, Guruk is literally trying to put down a mutiny at the start of the fight. And as the fight is ongoing, like he's smashing a subordinate into the mast while cannonballs are hitting his ship. So this is the conflict on Guruk's side is he's barely alive. He's still recovering from being heavily wounded. And he's got his own subordinates that are gunning for him. And so he's also in that same position of, I've got all these people that are against me and I'm trying to survive to the next day. So a lot of conflict happening aside from just the ships shooting each other and people dying and chaos occurring.
So the one of the things about the final fight that I really liked was, I mean, you had brushed against it, right? It was, if you could read into that order from Charn to Caitlin, you are not Navy. So go deal with the smallest ships out there and let the Navy do the Navy stuff, right? It wasn't explicitly said. You don't actually see that bias anywhere, like brutally ham-handed from Charn during the writing of the novel, and that characterization isn't there. But there is a certain pride in the professionalism, right? And so you could read that into the order, and then Caitlin being like, I don't have to listen to you per se, so I'm going to go do this other thing instead, right? Which, again, the difference between the strict command and the privateer, mindset. In this instance, it worked, right? You could see if this had another 100 pages where they were working together, where maybe she does that and it doesn't work, right? But in this instance, in the final battle, it does work out. It does make sense, right? They win, so the stakes aren't exactly so giant, right? It's not like Caitlin's decision to do that forced Strifus to give up his ship, right? Which would have been a different set of story beats. Like Strifus, when I read it, I was like, okay, I get it, but wow. Okay, so just inside baseball, when I wrote my big battle at the end, I was like, yes, this goes to this, goes to this, goes to this. The big bad guy makes this decision at the end, and that makes perfect sense to me. And other people read that and went, wow, that was sudden. And I'm like, it was sudden. what do you mean, dude? I set this up. I'm a genius. But when I read it again, I was like, yeah, it's totally sudden. So when I read the battle and they had just started shooting cannonballs at each other, and Strifus is like, we're going in the middle and I'm sacrificing everybody. I was like, that seems a little fast, right? Because I didn't feel as if the stakes they weren't up against the ropes yet, right? But then, I reread the section. I was like, okay, no, I can actually kind of see it. You can see it in some of the calculus that Charn is making and some of the decisions he's making. It's like, yeah, we really are kind of outgunned here. Man, I did not expect to have that other ship. This is going to end up being a problem. And as far as Charn and Strifus know, Caitlyn's going off to deal with a bunch of goblin rabble somewhere. They don't understand that she's taking on that other ship yet, right? So it does make sense, but it wasn't, me, big dumb reader. And then the character thought this. Like I was looking for that in that section the first time I read it. So I don't know, Mark, if that resonates with you or not.
Oh, it's definitely a fair comment. I'm trying to cast my mind back a few years now.
Yeah.
When in terms of Strifus and this whole, I'm going to go park a frigate between two other ships and I'm going to kick out both broadsides and it's going to do a hell of a lot of damage, but they're going to hit me back. But it's all right. It's all right because who dares wins, right? And I'm going to come out the other side and they're going to be burning and we're all going to be high-fiving with heavy casualties and the Medal of Honor's coming my way.
Right.
It was more what was in his head that, sometimes these things work. Captain called Cochrane, he had a brig very similar to the Martolian Queen, that kind of size, ship taken up from trade, I think it may even have been. He took out a frigate, a French frigate, because he sailed so close to it, taking hits on the way, he got underneath the arc of the guns, so the guns couldn't depress enough, and blew it to hell until it surrendered. A much, much bigger ship. Sometimes you do these crazy things and you end up making your entire career, your whole life, everything from that moment. And I think when I was writing it, that's what I thought. Yeah, he doesn't want to go out in a blaze of glory. He's seen an opportunity to make his name for the rest of his life, and it's brave. It's really brave, but it's also stupid.
It's very stupid.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, there's a 10% chance I'm going to end up being set for life here with the prize money.
Right.
But the 90% happened. You're all dead. And but I'm trying to go from memory here. I think that's what I had in mind when he did it, but I can't remember. It's been a while.
Right. It's presented from Charn's perspective, where he's not looking at the wow, look at the swashbuckling risk taker. It was, oh man, you're throwing it away, right? And so from his perspective, you don't get that calculus of glory, right? He's just looking at it as a straight tactician.
Yeah, and this is someone with 10 years more experience of command. So someone who shows the maturity.
Right.
I think Strifus, because we don't get his side. We don't understand his mentality walking into this because we haven't seen his perspective, which is interesting because it's a valiant, we'll call it valiant decision to go do this thing and dive between and do all the shooting and take some hits, and everyone else is watching him sacrifice. And I would agree with you, Mark. I think he's looking at it from the perspective of, this is how I get my admiral rank within a couple of years. This is how I become the youngest admiral that's ever existed in the Basilean Navy. This is how I make my mark and I become this super iconic thing. It's the General George Custer, like, we're going to take on all these native peoples and win with an extremely insignificant force because I'm awesome. And he's not. It's I've done the calculus and this is a great idea, except I'm really bad at math. And it doesn't work in his favor. It helps everyone else. Like, everyone else is much better off for it. I just think they're not having his side of that mental process makes Charn just extremely frustrated at watching someone throw everything away in a way that absolutely helps everyone, but could you have done something different that would have had your ship also survive? And you see that bit of despair because, I mean, the Pious still gets blasted to absolute hell. It's not like he does this and everyone else sort of walks away unscathed with a huge victory and nothing bad happens. So yeah, it's an interesting conflict there.
I'm thinking about this in like the terms of like Armada, the game too. Like we've all played Armada here. Those listening, how many times have you said, "Oh, I'm gonna go between these ships and get these awesome close range shots. It's gonna be awesome." Then you kind of get there and like, "Oh, wait a minute, I didn't have enough movement to get out of the way of my own fire. Crap!" And then you get blown to bits, right? I mean, I thought that was pretty fitting for the game universe too, for how that all played out.
Yeah, the game universe stuff was fun because, but I think that's one of the things that after every one of these projects, you got to look and you got to say, what can I do better? And one of the I think the best review, the most detailed review I had, which went into quite a lot of pages of it, really, really good stuff. And it said, here's the stuff which worked, great, I'll do more of that. Here's the stuff which wasn't as good. And it's not flaming, it's not trolling. It's phrased maturely. So you listen and you go, cool, thanks, I'll do that better. And it said two things. One was it's a little bit too real world Napoleonic. There's not enough other races and magic and cool stuff like that. So it's like, okay, through thick and thin's going to have more. Great. The other one was about the game mechanics. And it's like the orcs, they've got one thing, the special rule in the game. They ram stuff. And no orc rams anyone. And it's like, yeah, well, and that was accurate as well. That was fair. Which is why it's really awkwardly and uncomfortably crowbarred into the opening fight in Through Thick and Thin when an orc rams someone. It's like, there you go, I did it. So, but yeah, we have these conversations from the authoring world within, for us contracted on the side, and Mantic doing the games. And in an ideal world, it would just merge. It would all come together perfectly, but it can't, and the game has to come first. We're there to support the game. The game doesn't support the novels. So, it's cool that works. I think that exactly as you said, Alex, with, you chuck a ship in between and go, look at that, double broadside. It's like, yeah, but they're both going to hit you. I wish I'd done a bit more. But as we said, Armada was in really, really early days, so I'm not going to fall on my sword too much and say it was a disaster. It wasn't a disaster; it just could have been a bit better. But Armada was, as I said, it was in development as I was writing this to try and make the releases come together. So it's. I think the sequel does it better. I hope it does.
Well, in fairness to you, Mark, you do bring up, I think, the drill on the Blood Runner, like spinning earlier on in the novel, and in some cases, it's more of a payoff or better. It's better for the story to like have the threat of something, but not have it like pay off and hit than for it to actually occur. So I think that all went, in my opinion, quite well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I suppose at least the reference to it can happen and it's threatening is there. I use Blood Runners a lot, even though in the game they're like a support ship, so they're harder to get into a fleet. And it's not a particularly good ship in the game, but the model is so cool. I absolutely love the model of the Blood Runner. It's just like, orc ships shouldn't be standardized. I don't think there's an orc design bureau with guys in 3-piece suits with pocket watches, staying up all late night and drawing lines on graph paper for ships. They're all going to be different. So certainly when I was tinkering away and bought an orc fleet for it, the clippers and the super glue came out, and it's just like, just rip them apart, put them back together, make them all weird and different and orky, but not the Blood Runner. It's cool. I think that ship just looked awesome.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah.
As far as Armada is concerned, there is also something to, and I have this conversation when I play Armada with people who haven't played, especially against orcs before. I say, all right, orcs have a thing where they want to ram you, because when they ram you, they can also, board. That's the boarding action kicks off of ramming for them. And so the opponent spends the entire game going, dear God, I don't want to get rammed. And then I'm just like, cool, I'm going to continue to shoot you while you try to keep from getting rammed. And so it's that threat of getting rammed is really, really bad, so we can't let him do that. So the orc broadsides just keep going because your opponent has to put in that much effort to make sure they don't hit you. Like, put in that extra effort so they don't get close. And it is that split between, is this an effective special rule if you don't get to use it? Well, it is if the reason you don't use it is because your opponent is trying to spend their entire time not letting you use the special rule.
Yeah, that's it. Even in the game, the Blood Runner looks awesome, but its RAM isn't that good, and its crew strength isn't that good when it boards. So it's just like, if you were in a frigate or even something bigger and some Blood Runners coming toward you, you're like, fill your boots, dude. You go for it. Come ram yourself in the side, get on board, and we'll see what happens then, because Blood Runners are not that effective. But, I'll say it for a third time, they look cool.
They do look cool. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the sort of the final pieces of the battle. So the green hammer's got taken a lot of damage. It's gone through a lot. The Martolian Queen's coming back in from the other side. The Pious has been absolutely brutalized, and Charn, obviously now we've gotten to the stage Charn's dead, dying in that sort of space between. James is going to get thrown into command. They've got to deal with the Green Hammer. The sort of inverse boarding action of, all right, we're going to go board the orcs, and then suddenly the orcs are boarding you. The sort of back and forth that they have. I think you had mentioned in the notes, Alex, there's a really good pacing in here, the sort of culmination to the end of the fight with ships going and making decisions and doing all their things sort of culminates in this moment, or these few moments of the Pious having to defend itself from the orcs and really hoping to survive at this stage, but the orcs also in that state of, we're also really bad off. And I don't know if the Basileans really realize how damaged the Green Hammer was and really what they were looking at, because they don't know that Guruk's having to put down a mutiny, and one of their best goblins just got murdered by that subordinate who's trying to do the mutiny. So a lot going on at the end. And I think the final battle takes up like, I don't know, a fifth of the book. So there's a whole lot going on in that final battle. So Alex, give me your thoughts, kind of talk me through how you felt about it and where you were.
First, to hit off on the pacing, I brought it up for this section in the notes here, but just overall, just the pacing of this book being a naval combat book is one of the things that makes it so different than all like the land-based combat Mantic novels, right? The ships see each other from a long distance off because, guess what? It's kind of hard to find people on the open ocean before there were radars or space sensors or whatever, right? And now we're going to try to maneuver for the best weather gauge, or, basically being upwind. And then, you finally start shooting at each other with bow chasers taking ranging shots. And then usually there's some kind of, change over to want to get a broadside in action. And maybe you close even closer. The closer guns are getting in, and then maybe there's a boarding. It's a very deliberate pacing that always seems to pay off like really excellently in this book. And there's no better example of that in this final battle, right? Just everything kind of coming together. There's a part in this too where the Martolian Queen notices that the Pious is engaged and says, "Hey, maybe we should try to get involved in that. Maybe we can go in like the powder stores of the Smasher, and then that'll sink them, and then we can have our victory that way." A pretty risky move whenever you have the ships together, and one that's also reflected in the game mechanics too. You don't want to be near a ship blowing up in the game either. But just overall, just a fantastic cherry on top of the novel for the whole sequence, in my opinion.
Yeah, so the thing that I really liked is to piggyback on what you just said, Alex, is that a lot of the battles when they go from clean to messy, right? Once the ships get in, then decisions are made and the consequences of actions happen, and then you have to make decisions in the moment. That was really well done in terms of the pacing and the shifting of the point of view, right, from ship to ship as the action is happening. The thing that I really liked is how do I put this? So Charn dies, right? So they see the blast happen. He's gone. James has to take command. James begins to make decisions in the naval way right? But meanwhile, Caitlin, because she's going off rogue essentially, and she's like, okay, well now I see this opportunity because I'm not even where I'm supposed to be, based on what Charn told me to do. So now I have this opportunity to come and go to the Green Hammer, right? So essentially everything starts from far away and it swirls closer and closer. And as things go out of control from a command standpoint, and as characters are dying and things are happening, everything is coalescing onto the action is on the Green Hammer, right? It is the centerpiece of the battle, and everything gets closer physically and et cetera to that one nexus for the fight, and that's where everything happens. That I thought was, looking at it from a how do you map a battle out and how do you build tension and how do you have it be interesting. I thought that was really good. So the question I have for you, Mark, is like when you sat down to start writing this, did you map the battle out? Right? And say, okay, I want to have this, then this, then this, and I know I want this to happen, so this is how I'm going to do that. Or did you start writing, and then as you were writing, the spirit takes you, right, and things happen? Like what is that in your process? And maybe it's a little too meta for the discussion, but I care.
No, not at all. It's like it's a bit funny to me because it shows how much I overthink these things. That when you say, "Did I map the battle out?" Literally. All of these stuff with every novel, it's not a case of like putting models on a table, but I will get a sheet of A4 paper and a biro and just draw out and say, this is here, this is here, this is here, and then develop it. So it's not so I kind of know how it's going to start, I know how it's going to end, but then you start to, as you're writing it, stuff kind of evolves a bit, so it's a little bit of both. But the hardest thing with this is that little triple-headed arrow of the wind direction. Of just like to make this happen, to give it that air of authenticity, which maybe even 90% of readers wouldn't notice or care about, but some will. Where was the wind coming from? With every single one of these, could a ship do what you said it could do? Or have you suddenly got a ship that's just turned dead through the wind with no consequences? So, yeah, that was the hardest thing, I think, that, with a lot of these set-piece naval battles, people have the wind off the starboard quarter or abaft of the beam, get the best from it, square rigger, and then they all go in the same line and blast each other. But this is mobile stuff. People are doing stuff. Probably not realistic, but it makes for a more fun kind of cinematic story. And things happen too quick as well. Something like this will probably take course over a day, whereas here it's probably comes across as an hour or two. So it's mapped out literally, and that's how I'm kind of visualizing it, of drawing this stuff and going, right, who's where now? Same as with the land-based stuff, of just thinking where's which unit, and therefore if this is moving and this is moving here, who can see what? And you get the perspective right of saying that this character saw something else to their right. You need to make sure that you've got right and left, because a lot of readers will be thinking this through and will see it. And if you get something as simple as that wrong, you're like, well, hang on, I'm not following this anymore. So yeah, it's literally mapped out. But in terms of each stage of it, there's also an element of, as that story unfolds, it's like I know where I need to get, but I'm not sure how I'm going to get there until I write it. And it kind of naturally happens, with all of the rewrites that entails, because I'm not one of these people who plans everything. And I don't think there's a better way or worse way. I think it's just an individual way of what do you enjoy most, because we write this stuff because we enjoy it, right? And so some people really enjoy the planning and then nailing it first time. Some people really enjoy the flexibility of I'll make a bit of this up as I go, but I got to be ready for a lot of rewrites because I'm going to make mistakes. So yeah, and I'm definitely the latter. I'm definitely one of those.
That's interesting. I mapped, so the battles that I had in my book, I mapped them out step by step. These are the units. This is where they're laid out. This is where they're going to be, and then the battle beats, the things that happen during the fight, during the battle. I needed to switch point of view characters to make sure that when something happened, I had the right point of view character to describe what was going on at the time, right? And so there's a lot of mapping that goes on. So even though you say you don't map things out, the fact that you took out a piece of paper and said, the ship's here, we're going to go in this direction, the wind is going here, and then So you know the mechanics of what is happening, and then the story beats have to match that, and then the point of view characters have to allow the reader to have an understanding of what's up, right? Where appropriate, so they have a feel for the actual location of the ships in space as they're reading, because that actually adds to the tension, right? And so there's a lot that goes into that. You may say that you don't map stuff out, but I thought it was very clear. A lot of battle scenes, you read them, and they're either they're too fast, they get glossed over, or they're not. I have no idea what's happening. All I know is that people are swinging swords and axes, and someone fell over. You know what I mean? Like, this gives you a context for what's up.
I think we're blessed in the Kings of War community. It's a really kind community. The worst thing we have to face as Kings of War novel authors is apathy. Which isn't that bad, you know. If there's people who aren't interested, then fair play to them. The novels and the lore's not for them, and that's absolutely fine. There's other franchises I've written in where people are absolutely invested and obsessed with the lore, and apathy is not the greatest threat. Hate mail and trolling is the greatest threat. And from some of these other things where I've been told, his novels are terrible, but the fight scenes are really good and really clear. So it's like, okay, well, I guess that's something. I'll take that.
I wanted to interject. I know that there are some comedic moments. I think, Alex, you mentioned in the notes the moment of Karnan hucking a goblin into the ocean. Great bit. And then I personally really like the bit at the end after James has hucked himself off of the green hammer and does the action movie Not Gonna Make It smash against the side of the Pious to have Karnan grab him and pull him on board, just to say, dude, you could have just run a little bit further down the ship and walked over. Like, you didn't have to jump, man. There's those great little moments in the fighting, and then obviously you have Gurok trying to get on board the Pious, and then them basically pushing him back onto the green hammer, spiking his feet down and being like, no, you're gonna stay there, we're gonna go get back on our ship now. It was great because the battle coalesces into these final moments of the Martolian Queen jumping in, and their people just basically sneaking on board to light everything, to light the stores on fire. I like how, I forget who it was, it may have been Zan, said, oh yeah, it'll be about 10 minutes. Like, you can't guarantee that, brother. Like, that could have been 15 seconds. Oh no, everything explodes. So the plan was great. Would it maybe have worked that way? Maybe not. But it was a great swashbuckly end, because you have those moments of, this is a very technical fight, we see everything laid out, and the end is just chaos, and it's people fighting, and the individual perspectives of the fight are very different than the overall aspect you get from the captain and the officers and how their ship is doing. So it brings that scale very much down to, Karnan holding his shield and holding a pike and stabbing things, which is it's a great place to be with the transition between in the battle itself. You go from the large scale down to the small scale. I appreciated that.
Oh yeah, I was working towards the novel cover because that piece of art had already been commissioned. And we're really lucky now in that we're in a position where we've built the foundations for these novels to support the lore, so we can say, could I have some custom art, please? And the answer is normally, whenever Mantic can, yes, you can. But that's not where we were back then. The cover to Steps to Deliverance, it was such early days. It's like, here's a generic Basilean picture. Cool, that's what we've got. We go with that. And then we got this one, and it's like, okay, there's a Marine with a pike, and there's a boarding action with orcs swinging across, and it's like, okay, I'm going to work towards that. And that guy there, that's Karnan. And even though he's already been drawn, I'm going to tie it in with that. And but in terms of that, again, that tone by the end of it, I think I was almost finding my feet in terms of where I should have gone. The internet meme of Anakin and Padme of you're going to do this, right? I had a real moment of that with Mantic. When they said to me, look, I had a conversation on the phone with someone very high up at Mantic, said, here's where we're going to go. And I was like, okay. Oh, yeah. I remember back in the day when GW did Man of War, and I loved playing that. So you're not going to give dwarves ironclads, right? Right? We had this really uncomfortable conversation. You already have. Oh, God. And then you're in this point where it's like, well, it kind of doesn't work, which I'll double back to say it doesn't matter that it doesn't work. But at the time, it doesn't work because you've got Empire of Dust ships with catapults, which are kind of classic era naval. I'm going to fire, a big crossbow with a big bolt on it. And then you've got ironclads, where if you took one dwarf ship and you made this fully realistic, if you park one dwarf ship on a trade lane, you take over the world because you cut off an entire country and you can't stop it because you've got 2,000 years of naval fighting technological development. And that's how I was thinking when I wrote Pious, and I was wrong. I was wrong to think it. And the thing which made me change my mind, which I referenced earlier, which I got into relatively recently, was One Piece. When you look at that, and I've read a ton of it, and that is how you tell a story about golden age of sail, where on the one hand you've got pirates and sailing ships, and then when the cool cigar-chomping naval commander turns up on his Harley to step in, it doesn't matter, because rule of cool means that this stuff really, really, really works. It doesn't matter if they then encounter something else and they've got ironclads and they've got steam propulsion. It doesn't matter because this isn't telling history. And I think in the early novels, I had too much of because the first books I wrote were straight down the line, Second World War and First World War history books. So I had too much kind of semi-amateur historian hat on, and Pious suffered from that as well. And I found that out by that battle scene. I think I kind of found out that no, silliness and chaos reigning can still be fun. And having jumping across with explosions in the background and doing Hollywood grabbing hold of a ship and having your mate pull you up on one arm and all, doesn't matter. It's just write it. Try and make the story entertaining. Don't try and make it to be historically accurate. And I learned that too late. If I wrote Pious again, it wouldn't be hugely different now, but it would be a bit different. It would be a bit sillier in places for the sake of action and adventure and cinematic stuff like that.
I think there's a space, and I appreciate if you're saying yes, there's a direction I could have gone, but I also appreciate the path that it's on, which is at the ship level. We try to keep some realism. Like, it's not perfect realism. We're not expecting you to do all the things. But when you go down to the character level, the individual gets to see fantasy. They get to see the heroic jump across. They get to see that moment that really shouldn't happen. And you don't have to explain it. You don't have to bother explaining it. It's perfectly fine because it's a fantasy world and we expect that. And because again, I haven't read Through Thick and Thin, but if in Through Thick and Thin, you're like, yeah, I've got an Empire of Dust ship and it hucks a giant, catapult bolt towards an ironclad, that shouldn't work until you're like, yeah, but all it took was the Lich Priest going, touch it with one finger, suddenly it's magical. And it's like, wood, steel, don't care. I'm a big magic giant chunk of bone coming at you, buddy. And that's a place where all it takes is one very minor reference and you're like, oh, okay, I guess that works. So there's a cannonball splits in half because it hits the Elohai shield around the Pious, and it literally is just like pop in half, not going to hit anything. That's ridiculous. That doesn't work. There's no way that happens, but the flame is on. So yeah, no, that's fine. That works completely without even a thought. Like, there's not even a concern. The flame is on. Everything is explainable at this point.
Yeah, I think, but as you said though, with 10 minutes before this thing goes up, you can't say that. But if you're being cynical, you can say, well, that's plot armor and convenient. If I was being too kind to myself, it serves the story. It's probably somewhere in between the two. But sometimes it's just like people aren't tuning into this because they want a history documentary or a lesson in science. So try and make it. Is believable the right word? I don't know. Probably not. But engaging. That's got to take priority. And I think if I was to, because we all should, any of the stuff we do, we should be constantly looking back at ourselves and going, that went well, do more of that. That didn't go well, do that better. The thing I screwed up in the early novels was I was a slave to historical detail. Too much. And that's one of the things I screwed up on. Another was writing too much what I thought people wanted and not what I enjoyed writing. And and I think, Pious almost. Which character develops the most? Well, me. I developed the most because I realized through the process of writing that, write what you want to write, which for me is more light-hearted, upbeat, hopeful stuff and less of the nudging grimdark stuff. And also, don't be a slave to history. I've written for Bolt Action and done, campaign books and rules, and that's I can do the history stuff. I've written history books. I can do that. This isn't the place for it. This is the place for just to try and make people say, "Wow, that's cool." That's all you're trying to do. Sell the game, make the game look cool, make people, like a movie. You want to leave I like leaving a movie theater being uplifted and going, "That was a real exhilarating, fun experience," and that's hopefully what a novel should be. I developed doing Pious.
Yeah, I love it.
Last thoughts. I know we have to touch on the very end of the book, and then we got to jump into our quick fire, but I know we want to at some point wrap this up too, because we've been here a bit. So any other final thoughts on the last battle, or we could shift into the end of the book as well?
Back to the game side of things, I thought it was interesting. If I remember correctly, the last fleet was 1 Smasher and 3 Blood Runners, which I think is technically an illegal fleet in the game. But since we all love Blood Runners and how they look, I think we can easily overlook that for this.
Yeah, that's it. And sometimes that would be my defense. You deal with Mantic, and they rightly, because making the game work is the priority, and it should be the priority. When we work a lot closer now, in a really good way, working a lot closer. And when you have these conversations of, but that wouldn't work in the novel because it's like, okay, can you put this feature in the novel? Well, it wouldn't work as a storytelling. Then you throw it right back at them and go, you used an illegal fleet there. Yeah, storytelling. A legal one wouldn't work. So it's got to work both ways.
That's great.
So let me ask, any thoughts from anyone on the end of the book? So you get the Caitlin embracing her privateer queen. You get James embracing becoming a Basilean Navy captain. The kind of the shift in both of their characters, everything's sort of evolving. I really wanted a last chunk at the end of the book, Mark, which was an orc just like clinging to a piece of destroyed wreckage, and he's still got a wig that's like half on his head and his overcoat, and he's somehow survived. I kind of need that in my life because Gurak is a really great character.
All I'll say is give Through Thick and Thin a go.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Yep.
It would have been fun just to have that little callback in there, but if it's in Through Thick and Thin, hey everybody, go buy Thick and Thin and read it. It's next on my list. Any other thoughts? I don't want to belabor the ending of the book for everybody.
The last scenes for me, I always love these things, and they're always the things I end up with. Again, Brandon as the editor of every company I've worked for in any setting, Brandon is the most emotionally invested in what he does. He cares so much. And going through endings of books with him is one of the most hilarious creative processes you'll ever do. It's like Steps to Deliverance. Yeah, could you just get rid of all of the post-traumatic stress and make it kind of fun? Not really, Brandon. It's you're going to miss the point that we meet in the middle. But this one was great because I was just like, I had my head in my hands. I was like, what do you think of the ending? Yeah, I liked it. I liked the ending. You didn't think it was unoriginal, Brandon? So what do you mean? Well, it's about a naval lieutenant who's just been in a big battle, then gets promoted, then has the incredibly good-looking blonde come in, and shy of putting money in the jukebox for "You've Lost That Loving Feeling" to come on, then goes over to him. I've written it, and I've realized it's in a bar. It's sunny. It is the ending of Top Gun. It is exactly the same as the ending of Top Gun. And Brandon said to me, "Oh, I've never seen Top Gun." And we've never spoken since. So yeah, I won't speak to him anymore until he watches Top Gun.
No, I think it was great. I would never argue against that cliche ending, simply because the rest of the book is full of all the things that I wanted it to be full of. And so giving it the sort of cliche ending that also has there's going to be more, like, just wait for the next piece, because this is setting up. We've set everything up for these two characters to do more things later on. That I think was a great ending, albeit the ending to Top Gun, perfectly fine. It's not a thing that really detracted for me from the ending at all. So, Mike, what were your thoughts on the ending?
Yes, the ending, even though, yeah, dude, it's Top Gun. I looked at it though, and I was like, yeah, but it doesn't feel derivative or forced, because at the beginning of the novel, James is like, I don't want to be in the Navy anymore because I don't have any opportunity. I've been grinding away at this for all this time, and it's just not, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And then he gets brought back both emotionally because of his relationship with Caitlin, and also more importantly, man, he got promoted pretty quickly in the last, over the course of the book, and also showed himself to be capable in those roles in the moment, right? And so it wasn't just, oh, well, now I've got my bars and I'm off to the races. It's, I can do this, and I know that I can do it. And maybe now I because I have this confidence, maybe it's worth staying. And so the growth of James over the course of the novel, from where he begins this, the cynical, I can't wait to, that carries through even after he has great success with Caitlin. When Caitlin is like, takes her emotions out on him, he's like, well, this isn't worth it. Right. And then the two turning points for him is, the first one is Caitlin comes to him and says, I'm sorry, as a person and also professionally. And then later on, when Charn goes and James runs the show and he is successful, right? Like, both of those lead to the ending. The ending makes sense, right? Even though, yes, it is totally Top Gun. So
yeah, with regards to the ending too, circling back to me wanting to fight Nathan on which character it changes the most in the story, I think this is where, you see James's like total transformation and change that rivals that of Caitlin and Captain Charn. In the beginning of the book, he's talking about all his plans to go to Golden Horn, hang out with his buddies and family, run a business. And, he's deriding all the Navy terminology. And I think he and Karn are always talking about TNB, which stands for typical Navy bullshit. And he goes from all that and more at the beginning to accepting the captaincy of Pious and, buying into the TNB system, which he was earlier deriding in the book. So, yeah, overall, like everyone else said, I won't repeat it too much, but love the ending too.
And it's cool because you see like even Karnan is like, I'm a Marine, right? I'm not just, I'm not a soldier anymore. I'm a Marine. He takes that on as well, right? And so, the experience solidifies people's decisions into what they're going to do from now on, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, certainly.
All right, so let's do our quick fire stuff at the end, because I know we've got to wrap up fairly soon. So let's go through these. Who's your favorite character? And I'll start here with Alex, because I know what your answer is going to be, and prove me wrong.
I'll pick the easy button here before anyone else does, and take James Elias. There's a lot about him that I felt like I could really relate to.
Well, if you're going to pick James, I'm going to pick Caitlin. So there, right? And then Nate, you pick Charn, and we'll move on. You know what I mean? Like, so to be honest, I actually think Gurak is great. Gurak is great because one, he's a caricature, right? In the beginning, he's a force of nature, but then later on, like there's a little nuance there. He's trying to get, hey, go learn some naval go learn some naval stuff, and if you can figure out which way the wind blows, you can be the captain of of the next ship. You know what I mean? And so it's that sort of growth and understanding. Like, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it well. And it's not hard to have an orc have character growth, because they start from like zero, right? But he started from an interesting place and then moved on to a smarter place, which I thought was kind of cool.
I was actually going to say Karnan is probably my favorite character. The easy answer is Caitlin because I loved her story and it's a great fun bit. But I think Karnan right at the end when he says, "No, I'm a Marine. Like this is who I am now. You asked me to do this to figure out how this could work. I've done it. This is my thing now, and I'm connected to this." And his growth to there, the pieces you get of him as just a person along the way were great. I really enjoyed him. Mark, what was your favorite character?
Drunk Admiral, definitely.
All right, good to know. Mike, we'll start the next one with you. What made you the angriest, saddest, most emotional point in the book for you?
There's two, but I'm gonna go with the obvious one. The Charn passing, and then having James see the Elohi come at that moment, right at the darkest hour. I thought that was very very cool, very emotional. The other scene I'll be quiet. I'm going to steal somebody else's scene if I keep talking.
Alex.
Yeah, this is tough because not really much in the book made me like angry. I guess the most emotional was for me the scene where Caitlin is relaying to Charn all the good things that James was doing and just kind of seeing all the, understanding like, James's kind of defeated attitude at that point, I guess sort of brought out some sadness in me.
I was going to say it's Caitlin's moment of being broken when she comes back with a busted ship. And she doesn't have any options and she's in despair mode and having to make tough choices. And her position in that moment is at her most vulnerable and she hates that. There's a lot more other emotional pieces that are there, but I think that's where I connected most with her feeling desperate and feeling that she doesn't have any choices and all the choices she's being presented with are bad. And how can she do something that will help her get through this? It's not to me, it wasn't like as obviously emotional, but it was that piece that I go back to is where's that sort of emotional turning point for a character. And that was in my mind, the biggest one. Mark, where were you at with that?
With all of these projects that you get, you live and breathe them for however many months it is you're working on, and then as soon as it finishes, the next contract's waiting, and it's just bang, move on. And it's really sad in a way because you live and breathe it in all of your spare time to make it happen and to meet the deadline, and then you move on, and it's meaningless. It's in the rearview mirror. But occasionally you'll flick through it again and just have another look and remind yourself. And when I read through it, the two which stood out to me were Charm dying, which I thought, geez, I laid that on quite thick, but I remembered why I was kind of inspired by some of the paintings of the Napoleonic era and that view of faith, religion, and angels and passing, and wrote it with, from James's point of view, is it real or has he just taken a knock to the head and he thinks he's seeing it? Because I am just unbelievably soppy, I'm very happy with the Top Gun ending. Even though it's not mine, it's Bruckheimer's. They're my two best favorite bits to read through. In hindsight.
All right. So as far as the most poignant, thoughtful moment kind of makes you dwell on it from a thought perspective, Alex, where were you coming? What was your moment that was the most thoughtful or poignant for you?
I hope I'm answering the right question. I'm going to cheat a little bit here anyway, but basically any time that Charn had his perception or like his mind kind of changed is what it is for me. Like for instance, the scene with Karn on the Marines where he has like more respect for the Marines after they defeated all the orcs in the defense of the mines, and the whole ending sequence with Charn where he kind of comes around on his view of James as well as kind of his view on the end towards the end and twilight of his naval career.
I'll throw in real quick. I think mine was when Gurok tells his subordinate, go read a book. Like you can't keep just being an orc anymore. This isn't land. This is the ocean. We have to learn this better. And it showed evolution of his character, but also evolution just of the ethos of the orcs. That if we're going to try to compete with these people, we have to get intelligent. And that's not normal. Like that's a different thing. So it's like, okay, I could see like the wheels turning in this character, and he is going to become has the potential to become way bigger and way scarier if this can keep up, if he could continue on this path. So that was mine. Mike.
Yeah, I think the most poignant moment for me was when Charn has the officers up on deck, and he, let's have a dinner. Let's have a dinner together. Let's embrace the moment for the next couple hours, and let's hold it for as long as we can before we have to go back out to sea again. I thought that was good. That was very good.
Yeah, I agree. Mark, you have any thoughts there?
Similar, yeah. That one again, looking back on it with hindsight, the other one would be probably a bit weirdly the yacht club scene. That whole kind of thing of because it's not specific to the Navy, to the military, to anything like that. It's just professional life. Of when you get to that point where you're disgruntled after years of your perception of I've given everything. I joined up with this is what I thought it would be. The reality is it's not this. I've given it 100%. I'm not where I wanted to be, and I've had enough, and I'm leaving. And now I'm being asked to do something I'm not comfortable with. I do have loyalty and, to do the right thing by the people who I work for because of professional integrity. But there's also the personal integrity of I'm not going to lie to someone who is really down on their luck. So yeah, that kind of really pompous thing to say. I try and prioritize the writing characters and making it real things rather than, I know some authors, Clint does deities and what that means in Panathor a million times better than I could ever do. I just try and write about normal people and make it within this weird setting of greenskins with pointy ears and axes, situations which people can relate to, which are kind of universal.
All right, we're going to go to the final step in our quickfire questions, which is what were you most surprised by? I will take the honor of going first so that people can't steal it from me. Honestly, the part that surprised me the most was Caitlin's response after the Brigantine fight with her shame and her anger towards James. In my mind, it was reading towards a moment of, awesome, we're a team, we formed together, great work, high fives all around, and she does not appropriately deal with her emotional response. I appreciate her later coming back. Like, she does the right thing later on. But I was surprised when she didn't go the everything's great and we're all unified now, because that's where I felt it was going to go to. And she takes a really hard turn, and then explaining why she had that mindset and her talking through it with Sand was really helpful, because for a moment I was like, that felt weird and forced. And then come back later, okay, it wasn't weird and forced. She's dealing with obviously her own demons. She's got her own problems, and she has to come to grips with this, and she didn't do it right the first go around. So that it surprised me, but it was surprise in a bad way at first, and then it recovered itself in a good way. Mike, what are your surprise moment?
It was Guruk getting saved on the beach. To be honest, I did not think that's how that was going to go. I figured he was going to get shut up and he'd be like, all right, we're out of here, and then call the retreat. But having one of his subordinates pick him up and carry him off, and then, for him to acknowledge it later, like, dude, you should have just left me there, right? If you really don't want me to, if you don't want to follow me, you have your chance. But that, once again, very un-Orky, but it shows them evolving as a fleet, which is cool.
All right, Alex.
Yeah, if this was in the pre-spell check era, my one would be that, Lieutenant was spelled right every time, because it's been a part of my personal title. I can't spell that word right. I always get the E, U, or the I, E, and the U all confused in the front. So I was going to say props on spelling it right every time. I think that's kind of a freebie in the spell check era. But yeah, I guess pouring out for the lieutenant still that died. But just overall, just really surprised by how much I enjoyed all the off action storytelling. Just loved all that so much. Didn't expect it from maybe a game book as often, but just really blew me away overall.
Yeah, it would have been hard for me to surprise myself with bits in the text, although, yeah, I'm kind of forgetful, but it'll sound really trite to say I was surprised with how much I enjoyed the process, but I genuinely was on this one. Some of these books, I've written now fiction, non-fiction, whatever, 15, something like that. Some of them are a lot more of a chore than others. When I set up an Amazon author account, it says, and you sell yourself a little bit. And it says, pick a book which you wish, if someone were to have you wish more people knew about. I picked Pious. And when I had the opportunity to do some stuff for Black Library, and they said, send us an example of your work, I chose Pious. And I got the contract and did some Black Library stuff based off Pious. So up until two of the recent ones I've done, it was my favorite of all the books I've done. So it sounds really trite. So I was surprised with how enjoyable the process was, but I stand by that. It really was. It was a really, really good fun to do for something I thought would be that would, took over so much of my life at a really busy time.
Oh, that's awesome. I very much appreciate that, and I think I had a much better time reading this book than I initially expected walking in. I know I've said that multiple times with different books, but every single book so far has just been, I'm not sure what to expect. Let's see where this goes. And Pious was just basically from the get-go, just absolute fun adventure. So highly enjoyed, and I know that I've heard the same from everybody else here. Any final thoughts from anyone before we wrap things up here for today?
No, I just thank you for writing it. Right. I mean, it was cool.
Yeah.
It was, I think I mentioned when I've been on the podcast in the past, traditionally game fiction or fiction set in game worlds, as it gets looked down on a little bit, and I fall into that. But this was fantastic. It was a great novel, period. Whether it's set in a game world or not, it was really good. And so if you haven't thrown $12 at it, think, what's wrong with you? Go buy this damn thing.
Here.
I agree. Yeah.
Honestly, thanks very much for the last few hours. We're chatting through it, because it's like, I said, it's in the rearview mirror now. This is years in the past, and you forget about these things. And to kind of dust off and think through the process and have the support, it's genuinely appreciated. It genuinely is. That's about as emotional as an Englishman can get. So no, honestly, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's been great having everyone on and being able to walk through this great book. Again, if you have not purchased it and read it, purchase it and read it. It is 100% worth the read through. It's a great story. It's great action, a lot of things involved. I know we'll probably circle back with Mark at some point on more books and come back to Through Thick and Thin, which is the next book in the series. And he's written, 7 books in the Tales of Panethor series for Kings of War already. So there's a lot that's out there that he's put out, and of course the other books as well. I appreciate you guys jumping on, and I know we have to sign off from here. So if you haven't already, again, go get the book, and as always, keep countercharging.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Countercharge. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at counterchargepodcast@gmail.com, on Twitter at countercharge15, or by commenting on the Countercharge Kings of War podcast Facebook group. If you enjoy the show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Until next time, keep countercharging. Music is a composition of Kevin MacLeod and is licensed under Creative Commons.